Let's take a deep breath, relax, and slowly explore the story of zinc. Somewhere in the dry, sun-scorched foothills of one of the oldest mountain ranges on Earth, in what is now the state of Rajasthan in northwestern India, a worker crouched beside a row of small clay pots shaped like eggplants. The furnace beside him glowed at a heat that would make the air shimmer and sting the eyes. Inside each of those little clay vessels, a mixture of crushed ore and charcoal was undergoing a quiet transformation, one that no one in Europe, no one in the courts of the great empires of the Middle East, and no one in the laboratories of Chinese scholars had yet managed to achieve. The metal inside was turning to vapor, traveling downward through the vessel into cooler chambers below and condensing into a silvery blue liquid that dripped, drop by drop, into waiting pots of water. The workers at this place, called Zawar, were producing pure zinc, and they had been doing it generation after generation for hundreds of years before anyone else on Earth figured out how. That is a rather remarkable thing to consider as you settle in tonight. Because what makes zinc different from almost every other metal in human history is this: people used it for thousands of years before anyone knew it existed. Think about that for a moment. Copper was easy to spot. Its ores were colorful, and native copper gleamed in riverbeds for anyone with sharp eyes. Gold announced itself with unmistakable brilliance. Iron left rust-colored stains in the soil that ancient people could follow to its source. Tin was soft enough to work with your bare hands, but zinc was invisible. It hid inside other minerals, and whenever anyone tried to free it by heating, it simply vanished into the air, turning into a gas at the very temperatures needed to release it from its rocky home. The reason for this disappearing act is worth pausing on. Zinc melts at a modest 419 degrees, a temperature easily reached in any ancient furnace. But it boils at 907 degrees, which is actually below the temperature you need to smelt it from its ores. So the very act of freeing zinc from its mineral prison immediately turns it into a gas. In an open furnace, the zinc vapor simply rises with the smoke and vanishes into the night sky. In a closed furnace, it condenses on the cooler walls as a white powder that ancient metalworkers sometimes noticed but never understood. No other common metal behaves this way. It is as though nature designed zinc specifically to avoid being discovered, building a kind of trap that kept the metal hidden for thousands of years. And yet, all that time, zinc was quietly shaping civilization. It was doing so through an alloy, a mixture of metals that you almost certainly know. That alloy is brass, the warm golden metal that has decorated temples and filled treasuries since ancient times. Brass is simply copper mixed with zinc. Ancient metal workers across the world discovered that when they heated copper together with a certain pale stone called Calamine, the copper turned golden, became harder, and took on a beautiful shine. They did not know that Calamine contained zinc. They did not know that the zinc was turning into a vapor and soaking into the copper. They simply knew that the stone worked a kind of magic on their copper, and they valued the result. The earliest known brass objects date back more than 3,000 years, to ancient Judea, where metalworkers created brass containing nearly a quarter zinc. By the 7th century before the Common Era, the Greeks were making brass and calling it a word that meant false silver, a name that reveals both admiration and confusion. They could see that this golden metal was not quite gold, not quite silver, not quite copper, but something altogether different. They had no way of knowing that one of its ingredients was a metal that existed only as an invisible vapor. The Romans, practical as ever, turned brass into a cornerstone of their money system. When the Emperor Augustus reformed Roman coinage, he chose a copper-zinc alloy for some of the most important coins of everyday life. Fresh from the mint, these coins gleamed with a golden color. But here is a lovely detail. Because zinc boils away so easily, every time mint workers melted down old coins to make new ones, some of the zinc escaped as vapor. Over the decades, the zinc content of Roman coins quietly fell, and the once golden coins grew dark and dull. The Roman Empire was losing its zinc, coin by coin, melt by melt, and nobody in the empire understood why. Meanwhile, thousands of miles to the east, those remarkable workers at Zawar had solved the very problem that would frustrate European scientists for another 500 years. Their solution was elegant. Instead of trying to catch zinc vapor above the ore, which is what European furnace designs tried to do, they arranged their little clay pots upside down so that the vapor traveled downward into cooler collection chambers beneath the heat source. It was distillation in reverse, and it worked beautifully. An Indian text from the 13th century describes this process in careful detail, explaining how to prepare the ore, build the vessels, arrange the furnace, and collect the metal. The instructions read almost like a modern engineering manual, and they leave no doubt that this was a mature, well-understood technology. The scale of operations at Zawar was not small. Archaeologists have uncovered more than 130,000 tons of waste material at the site, bank after bank of furnaces, each holding dozens of those eggplant-shaped clay pots. This was not a workshop. It was a factory, producing zinc on an industrial scale and shipping it across the Indian Ocean to markets in Southeast Asia, East Africa, and the Arab world. In 2016, the site was declared a National Geological Monument by the Government of India, recognizing what historians of science had known for decades. This was the place where humanity first mastered the production of pure zinc, a full 3 centuries before anyone in Europe could manage the same feat. The metal that would eventually be called zinc, a name that comes from a German word meaning prong or point, after the jagged crystals it forms when it cools, had been quietly shaping human life for thousands of years before it earned that name. It had colored the coins in Roman purses, hardened the brass fittings on Greek ships, and soothed the inflamed eyes of Egyptian patients who used calamine ointments without knowing what they contained. It was everywhere and nowhere, essential and invisible, the most important metal that nobody knew existed. This is the story of that hidden element, the metal that hid in plain sight for 3,000 years. The metal that gave Paris its silver rooftops and America its pennies. The metal that created a country and powered 1 billion batteries. The metal that your body cannot live without and that the modern world cannot function without. And it begins, as all great stories do, with someone who looked at something ordinary and saw something no one else could see. In the hills of ancient Judea, more than 3,000 years ago, a metalworker held up a finished object and turned it slowly in the light. The metal gleamed with a warm golden color, distinctly different from the reddish glow of ordinary copper. This was brass, and the person who made it had achieved something quietly remarkable without understanding the science at all. The object contained nearly 1/4 zinc, a metal the craftsman had never seen, never held, and could not have named. The zinc had arrived in the copper invisibly, absorbed as a vapor from a mineral called calamine that the metalworker had mixed with copper and charcoal in the furnace. The process that created this ancient brass is called cementation, and it is one of the cleverest accidental technologies in all of human history. Can you picture how it worked? The metal worker would place pieces of copper into a sealed pot along with crushed calamine and charcoal. When the pot was heated, the charcoal stripped the oxygen away from the zinc hiding inside the calamine, turning it into a vapor. That vapor then soaked into the solid copper, dissolving into it like sugar dissolving into warm water. The result was brass, golden and beautiful. The most remarkable thing about the whole process was that the metalworker never saw liquid zinc, never handled zinc as a separate substance, and never even knew that a distinct metal was involved. All they knew was that certain stones, when heated with copper, produced something wonderful. This is why zinc remained hidden for so long. The very process that made it useful also made it invisible. The knowledge of brass making spread slowly across the ancient world. By the 7th century before the Common Era, Greek metalworkers were producing brass and admiring its golden sheen. The Romans embraced it with their characteristic enthusiasm for practical engineering. Roman brass production was centered in the Rhineland, near present-day Germany, where deposits of calamine were plentiful. The metal was used for everything from decorative objects to military equipment. Roman soldiers wore belt fittings and helmet decorations made of brass. The great curved horns that signaled commands across the battlefield were made of brass because the metal produces a loud, clear tone that carries above the noise of combat. But the most important Roman use of brass was in their coins. When Augustus reformed the monetary system, he chose brass for the middle value coins that ordinary people used every day. The large coin called the sesterce, which was the standard unit for prices, wages, and taxes across the entire empire, was made of brass. A Roman citizen could tell a sesterces from a cheaper copper coin simply by its golden color, without needing to read any inscription. In a world where most people could not read, this visual shorthand was essential to the daily business of buying and selling. And here is where zinc played a quiet trick on the most powerful empire the Western world had ever known. Every time old coins were collected, melted down, and made into new ones, some of the zinc escaped as vapor. The mint workers noticed that their metal was losing its golden color, growing darker with each cycle of melting, but they could not understand why. They tried adding more copper, which only made things worse. Over the span of about 2 centuries, the zinc content of Roman brass coins fell from roughly 20% to about 5%, and the once bright golden coins became nearly as dark as ordinary copper. It was, in a quiet way, the first case of inflation driven by chemistry rather than politics, a slow decline in quality caused by a metal that nobody knew existed. Beyond Rome, brass carried deep meaning across many cultures. In India, brass vessels have been associated with religious life and domestic well-being for centuries. The brass plate from which meals are served and the brass lamps lit during festivals remain important parts of Hindu worship to this day. In China, brass was used for mirrors, bells, and later for coins during the Ming dynasty. And across West Africa, brass became both a currency and an artistic medium of the highest order. The famous sculptures from the Kingdom of Benin, many of which are actually brass rather than bronze, represent some of the finest metalwork ever produced anywhere in the world. The brass for these works arrived through trade routes stretching thousands of miles, connecting African artists to zinc-bearing ores mined on the other side of the earth, without anyone along the entire chain understanding the full nature of what they were trading. What distinguished brass from its older cousin, bronze, was primarily its color. Bronze made from copper and tin had a darker, more reddish-brown look. Brass, with its golden warmth, was immediately associated with wealth and beauty. In many ancient languages, the words for brass and gold were closely related, and more than a few ancient texts have been mistranslated because scholars assumed a reference to a golden metal meant gold when it actually meant brass. Brass also had practical advantages. It was easier to shape into thin sheets and fine details. It was more resistant to tarnishing than pure copper. And in regions where tin was hard to find, brass offered an alternative that was nearly as strong as bronze and far more beautiful. The story of ancient brass is really the story of zinc itself. A substance that shaped civilizations, decorated temples, filled armies with the sound of horns, and made commerce possible across an empire, all while remaining completely unknown as a separate element. The method of making brass by heating copper with calamine would continue in use for more than 2,000 years, well into the 1700s, long after pure zinc became available. Old-fashioned brass makers insisted that cementation produced a superior metal, and they were right, though the reason had less to do with magic and more to do with the way zinc atoms spread themselves evenly through the copper when they arrive as a vapor rather than a liquid. And so the metal that hid inside calamine continued its quiet work, golden and warm and nameless, waiting for someone to notice that it was there all along. Off the southern coast of Sicily, around 2,500 years ago, a merchant vessel was making its way toward port when something went terribly wrong. The ship sank, carrying its cargo to the seabed, where it would lie undisturbed for more than 25 centuries. When divers finally reached the wreck in 2015, they found something extraordinary among the scattered remains. Dozens of metallic bars, glowing with a warm golden color even after all those years underwater. Scientific testing revealed that the bars were made of a copper-zinc alloy, roughly 3/4 copper and 1/5 zinc. The press called it the metal of Atlantis because the ancient philosopher Plato had described a legendary civilization rich in a precious substance with a similar golden color. Whether or not the connection to Atlantis was real, the discovery proved something important. Zinc-bearing alloys were being produced and traded across the ancient Mediterranean in large quantities, long before anyone knew what zinc was. But zinc's presence in the ancient world went far beyond brass. Zinc minerals, particularly the stone called Calamine and the white powder that collected on the walls of copper smelting furnaces, were among the most valued medicines in Greek and Roman times. And the story of how ancient doctors used these zinc preparations is one worth lingering on tonight because it shows how close the ancient world came to discovering zinc without ever quite managing to do so. Imagine a Roman military doctor in the 1st century, a man named Dioscorides, traveling with the army from Italy to Greece, across North Africa, through Persia and Egypt, collecting medicinal knowledge wherever he went. Dioscorides was not writing from the comfort of a library. He was a field doctor who watched treatments work and fail, who tested remedies on real patients, and who recorded what he saw with a careful eye. When he wrote about the white powder that gathered on the walls of copper smelting furnaces, he described it as a substance of real medical value. That white powder was, in fact, zinc oxide, though Dioscorides could not have known that. It formed when zinc vapor from the smelting process rose into the cooler upper parts of the furnace and combined with oxygen, depositing as a crusty white coating on the walls. Workers scraped it off carefully, and doctors prepared it for medical use. Dioscorides even graded different qualities of the powder by texture and color, noting that material collected from the upper furnace walls, where it had traveled farthest from the molten metal below, was the purest and most effective. The main uses were for treating eyes and skin. Eye infections were extraordinarily common in the dusty, sun-drenched world of the ancient Mediterranean. A particularly painful bacterial infection that causes scarring and eventual blindness was widespread across North Africa and the Near East, and zinc-based preparations offered one of the few treatments that provided genuine relief. This was not superstition. The mild cleansing and germ-fighting properties of zinc, which we now understand are related to its ability to slow bacterial growth, made it genuinely effective for treating surface infections and minor wounds. Ancient doctors had discovered through centuries of patient observation a treatment that modern medicine would eventually confirm. Pliny the Elder, the Roman writer who died observing the eruption of the volcano at Pompeii, also described zinc minerals in detail. He documented how the raw powder was ground fine, washed to remove impurities, and sometimes mixed with honey, rosewater, or egg white to create ointments and salves. Romans used these preparations not only for healing but also for cosmetics. Since the white powder could lighten the complexion, a beauty standard of the time that drove a busy trade in zinc-based products among the wealthy. Thousands of miles away in India, a medical tradition far older in its written records had independently reached the same conclusions. An ancient Indian medical text dated to 500 years before the Common Era, or even earlier, mentions zinc oxide as a salve for eyes and open wounds. The fact that two medical traditions separated by thousands of miles and with no contact between them both discovered the healing power of zinc minerals tells us something about how universally useful these compounds turned out to be wherever people found them. In Egypt, the medical scrolls contain references to minerals that scholars believe include zinc compounds used in preparations for treating eye diseases. The famous Ebers scroll, dating to roughly 1550 years before the Common Era, contains hundreds of recipes, some of which call for mineral ingredients that match the description of calamine or zinc oxide. Egyptian doctors would have encountered these white deposits in the smelting workshops near the great copperworking centers of the Nile region. A lovely piece of physical evidence emerged more recently when scientists analyzed 2,000-year-old medicinal tablets found in a Roman-era shipwreck. The chemical tests revealed that zinc compounds were among the active ingredients, confirming that zinc-based medicines were not just ideas written in old books but were actually manufactured, carefully prepared, dried, and shipped across the Mediterranean as finished products. There was a real pharmaceutical trade in zinc medicines, traveling the ancient sea routes in the holds of merchant ships. The knowledge passed on through the centuries. Arab doctors inherited and expanded upon this tradition. A term for zinc oxide preparations became one of the most important eye medicines in the medieval world, used by physicians from Spain to Central Asia. The great Persian doctor working in Baghdad in the 9th and 10th centuries classified zinc preparations among the essential ingredients for treating eye diseases, and his formulas were copied and adapted by healers across the entire region for generations. What is quietly remarkable about all of this is how close the ancient world came to revealing zinc as a distinct element without ever quite getting there. The doctors knew that certain minerals had healing powers. They knew these minerals were connected to copper smelting. They could tell good quality from poor. But the idea of chemical elements did not exist in the ancient world, and so calamine remained simply a useful stone. The white furnace powder remained simply furnace dust, and zinc remained a mystery hiding inside both of them, healing wounds and soothing eyes across 3 continents, without anyone suspecting that a previously unknown metal was doing all the work. When the philosopher Plato sat down to write about the lost civilization of Atlantis sometime in the 4th century before the Common Era, he described its fabulous wealth in terms designed to dazzle. The walls of the great citadel, he wrote, flashed with the light of a substance called orichalcum, something that was, in his telling, second in value only to gold. For more than 2,000 years, scholars have debated what Plato meant, whether orichalcum was a real metal or a piece of storytelling, whether it was brass or some other alloy, and whether the golden bars pulled from Sicilian shipwrecks in our own time might finally answer the question. The name orichalcum comes from Greek words meaning mountain copper or golden copper. In Plato's day, the word was already old-fashioned, referring to something rare and perhaps no longer made. An earlier poet, writing 4 centuries before Plato, mentioned it as a precious material used to make the armor of a legendary hero, suggesting that even then it carried a feeling of ancient wonder. A Roman writer later noted that orichalcum had once been valuable but had become common, a remark that fits perfectly with the history of brass. Over those intervening centuries, brass production had expanded greatly as metalworkers found richer deposits of calamine and developed better techniques. What had once been rare and precious had become an everyday alloy, and its name had shifted from something magical to something ordinary. The debate over orichalcum grew much louder in 2015, when divers working off the coast of Sicily recovered those golden bars from a shipwreck dating to roughly 600 years before the Common Era. When a second group of bars was found at the same site, along with helmets, the evidence became harder to ignore. The ship had sunk around the time Plato was describing, though Plato himself lived 2 centuries later. The discovery made headlines around the world and revived all the old arguments about Atlantis, though most archaeologists were quick to point out that finding brass bars in a Greek shipwreck, while interesting, did not prove anything about a fictional island. The makeup of the bars, roughly 3/4 copper with about a 1/5 zinc, fits neatly within the range of what ancient metalworkers could achieve using the cementation method. They had been cast into standard shapes suitable for trade, suggesting that a dedicated workshop had produced them and shipped them as raw material to be worked into finished objects elsewhere around the Mediterranean. But whether or not these bars represent Plato's Orichalcum is a separate question from their historical importance. What the wreck tells us is that brass was being made in large quantities and traded across the central Mediterranean more than 2,500 years ago. The ship was carrying enough brass to equip a small army or furnish an entire temple, which means demand for the golden alloy was strong, and the supply chains for its ingredients were well established. The Romans made the most lasting use of brass through their coins. When Augustus reformed the money system, he created a careful ranking of metals. Gold sat at the top, then silver, then brass, and finally copper at the bottom. The choice of brass for the middle value coins was deliberate. The golden color of fresh brass coins set them apart from the darker copper coins of lower value, creating a system where anyone could tell what a coin was worth just by looking at it. In a society where most people could not read, this visual difference was essential to the smooth running of daily trade. The sesterce, that large brass coin, became the standard unit of money across the entire Roman Empire. Prices were quoted in sesterces, fortunes were measured in sesterces, and the vast machinery of Roman taxation ran on sesterces. Soldiers received their pay in sesterces. The cost of building the great arena in Rome was originally recorded in sesterces. This meant that zinc, invisible and unnamed, underpinned the entire financial system of the most powerful empire the Western world had ever known. Every tax collector who weighed a coin, every merchant who counted out payment, every soldier who received his wages was handling zinc without the slightest awareness. And here is an irony worth pausing on. The chemistry of brass coinage reveals a slow, unintentional decline. Fresh coins from the mint of Augustus contained about 20% zinc, giving them a bright golden appearance. But each time coins were recalled, melted, and restruck, the zinc content dropped because zinc, with its lower boiling point, turned to vapor and escaped during each melting. The workers at the mint noticed the coins getting darker but thought the problem was impurities or poor technique. They added more copper to compensate, which only made things worse. By the late 2nd century, brass coins contained as little as 5% zinc, and the golden color that Augustus had so carefully chosen had all but disappeared. The visual system he had built was collapsing, undermined by the behavior of an element no one in the Roman world could understand. Scientists have traced this decline by analyzing Roman coins with modern techniques, creating a chemical timeline that mirrors the political and economic history of the empire. The data shows a steady drop in zinc content across the reigns of one emperor after another, with occasional small rises when fresh brass was being made rather than old coins being recycled. It was not fraud. It was not deliberate. It was simply a problem that could not be solved with the knowledge available at the time. Beyond Rome, the word orichalcum echoed through literature and legend for centuries, acquiring meanings that had less and less to do with actual metalworking. Medieval writers treated it as something mystical. Scholars of the Renaissance debated its composition, and the connection to Atlantis ensured that it would remain a subject of curiosity long after brass itself had become utterly ordinary. The riddle of orichalcum is, at its heart, the riddle of zinc, a metal that was present but unrecognized, valued but unnamed, essential to the economy of the ancient world but invisible to the scholars who wrote its history. It would take another 2,000 years before zinc would finally step out of the shadow of brass and reveal itself as the distinct, important element it had been all along. The landscape around Zawar, about 40 kilometers south of the city of Udaipur in Rajasthan, is deceptively quiet today. Dry scrubland stretches across the lower slopes of one of the oldest mountain ranges on Earth, its peaks worn smooth by hundreds of millions of years of wind and rain. Peacocks call from the thorny brush. Villagers tend small herds of goats along dusty paths. Nothing on the surface suggests the extraordinary industrial operation that once churned beneath this ground, an operation that produced the world's first pure metallic zinc and sustained it on a scale that would not be matched anywhere else for the better part of 1,000 years. When archaeologists dug into this landscape in the 1980s, what they found was staggering. Bank after bank of furnaces, each containing between 3 and 7 individual units. Each furnace held 36 of those distinctive clay pots, shaped like small eggplants, the vessels that are unique to Indian zinc technology. At full operation, a single bank of 7 furnaces would have contained 252 pots, each one loaded with zinc ore and charcoal, each one undergoing the same carefully controlled cycle of heating, vaporizing, and condensing. The waste left behind, more than 130,000 tons of it, told the story of centuries of continuous production on a scale that dwarfed anything else in the pre-industrial world. The technology that made Zawar unique was the solution to a puzzle that defeated every other civilization on Earth. You will remember from earlier that zinc boils away at the very temperatures needed to free it from its ore. In an ordinary furnace open to the air, any zinc that forms immediately becomes a vapor, and that vapor, the moment it touches oxygen, turns right back into a white powder. It was a maddening circle. To free the zinc, you had to heat it past the point where it stopped being a liquid, and by the time it became a gas, it had already escaped. The Indian metalworkers solved this with a beautifully simple idea. They sealed the top of each pot and left the bottom open, then placed the pots upside down inside the furnace so that the ore and charcoal sat at the top in the hottest zone, while the open lower end extended into a cooler chamber beneath the furnace floor. As the zinc vaporized, it traveled downward, helped by gravity and the pressure of the hot gases above it, into the cooler region where it condensed back into liquid metal. The liquid zinc dripped into water-cooled collection pots waiting below. The entire system was, in essence, a distillery, and the Indian term for it, meaning distillation by descending, is a perfect description of how it worked. Can you picture that for a moment? Rows of furnaces glowing in the heat, the air thick with fumes, and below the floor, in the darkness and the relative cool silvery drops of zinc gathering in clay pots filled with water. It was metallurgy as art, and the artisans of Zawar had perfected it to a degree that would not be equaled anywhere else on the planet for 500 years. The genius of this arrangement was that it used gravity as an ally instead of fighting against it. European attempts at zinc smelting tried to catch the zinc vapor above the heat source, but the vapor expanded and dispersed upward, and most of it escaped before it could be captured. The Indian system channeled the vapor downward into a naturally cooler zone where condensation was rapid and efficient. The yield was high, the losses were small, and the process could be repeated thousands of times with predictable results. An Indian scholarly text from the 13th century contains 2 detailed accounts of this zinc distillation, making it the oldest known instruction manual for zinc production anywhere in the world. The text describes everything, from how to prepare the ore to how to coat the clay pots before use. That coating, by the way, was made of turmeric paste, a detail that sounds almost ceremonial but was actually deeply practical. The turmeric formed a heat-resistant layer that prevented the clay from cracking during the extreme heating and cooling that each pot endured. Each pot lasted only a limited number of firings before the clay broke down and the coating extended its working life. The enormous number of broken pot fragments found at Zawar gives some idea of the continuous effort needed just to keep the operation supplied with fresh vessels. When exactly this process began is a matter of some scholarly discussion. Mining for zinc ore at Zawar stretches back over 2,000 years to at least 500 years before the Common Era, but mining the ore and producing the pure metal are vastly different achievements. Mining simply means digging up a mineral and recognizing it as useful. Producing pure zinc requires the entire system of sealed pots, inverted furnaces, collection chambers, and precise temperature control. The best evidence from dating the charcoal found at the smelting sites suggests that the production of metallic zinc began around the 9th century of the Common Era, with large-scale production becoming well established by the 12th century. The zinc produced at Zawar was remarkably pure and highly sought after. Ingots of it traveled through the trading networks of the Indian Ocean, carried by Arab, Indian, and later Portuguese and Dutch merchants to markets across Asia, Africa, and eventually Europe. The metal went by various names, most commonly something that sounded like tutanag, a word Europeans used to distinguish this imported Asian metal from locally produced brass. When those silvery ingots arrived in European ports, they baffled merchants and metalworkers who could not identify the substance or figure out how to make it themselves. Under the local rulers of Mewar, whose capital at Udaipur lay just to the north, zinc mining was an important source of wealth and military supply. Rulers collected taxes on production and controlled access to the richest ore deposits. Surplus zinc entered trade routes that connected Rajasthan to the ports of Western India and the wider Indian Ocean world. The decline of Zawar came not from any failure of technology, but from the disruptions of colonial economics. As European nations developed their own zinc production in the 18th and 19th centuries, the advantage India had enjoyed for 600 years began to fade. The furnaces that had once produced the world's purest zinc eventually grew cold, their clay pots crumbling back into the earth. Today, modern zinc mining still takes place at Zawar, extracting zinc from the same geological formations that ancient metalworkers used thousands of years ago. The continuity is quietly remarkable. The same hills, the same ores, the same basic idea of pulling zinc from the earth and sending it out into the world. And the story of those ancient workers whose names are lost but whose achievement endures is a gentle reminder that the history of science and innovation stretches far beyond the places and people we usually hear about. Along the steep banks of the Yangtze River in a region of southwest China, now part of the city of Chongqing, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of nearly 20 zinc smelting sites dating to the Ming Dynasty, the period between 1368 and 1644. The furnaces sat on terraced hillsides above the river, their rows of clay pots arranged with an industrial logic that feels strangely familiar, almost like a mirror image of the operations at Zawar, half a world away. Dating places the busiest period of these sites between 1435 and 1572, right in the heart of the Ming era, when Chinese demand for zinc was driven by one consuming purpose: making brass coins. Picture those hillside terraces for a moment. The river carves through steep gorges below, and the outlines of the old furnaces are still visible among the overgrown brush etched into the hillside like the foundations of a forgotten temple. Fragments of broken pots and dark, glassy waste litter the ground. These were not small, hidden workshops, but major operations, deliberately placed along the river for access to water for cooling and to the boat traffic that carried the finished metal downstream to the great mints and markets of eastern China. Chinese zinc technology appears to have developed independently of the Indian tradition, though whether any knowledge passed between the two civilizations along the Silk Road or the maritime trade routes of Southeast Asia remains an open question. The Chinese furnaces show differences in design, with smaller, more cylindrical pots rather than the eggplant-shaped ones used in India, and different methods for preparing the ore. Chinese metalworkers also used a wider range of raw materials, including a sulfur-bearing zinc ore that required an extra roasting step before distillation. This added complexity, but it allowed Chinese smelters to work with ores that the Indian method could not easily handle. The driving force behind all of this was money, quite literally. China's monetary system had relied for centuries on small round copper coins with square holes punched through the center, strung together on cords for transactions large and small. These coins had been the backbone of Chinese commerce for over 1,000 years, and producing them required staggering quantities of metal. But coins made of copper alone were too soft and too quick to corrode for heavy daily use. Adding zinc to the copper created brass coins that were harder, more durable, and more attractive, with a golden color that set them apart from older copper issues. By the 1500s, zinc had become essential to the Chinese mint, and the demand for it drove mining operations across the southern provinces. The transition from copper to brass coinage happened gradually. Early Ming coins were mostly copper, but as zinc production grew and the superiority of brass became clear, the proportion of zinc increased steadily. By the late Ming period, brass had become the standard material for Chinese coins, representing an enormous increase in the amount of zinc consumed by the imperial mints. This hunger for zinc coincided with one of the greatest periods of Chinese exploration and commerce. In the early 1400s, under the Yongle Emperor, China sent massive naval expeditions under Admiral Zheng He across the Indian Ocean, reaching as far as East Africa and the Persian Gulf. While these voyages were mainly diplomatic and commercial rather than colonial, they expanded Chinese awareness of foreign metals and trade goods. They may even have brought Chinese metalworkers into contact with Indian zinc production, though no definite evidence of such a meeting has been found. What the voyages certainly did was establish trade relationships that would later carry Chinese zinc to markets across the Indian Ocean, creating the curious situation of Chinese zinc competing with Indian zinc in waters that Indian traders had long considered their own. Chinese zinc eventually found its way to European markets too, carried by Portuguese and later Dutch merchants who recognized its commercial value, but were often unsure what exactly it was. Some European accounts described this imported metal as a form of tin, others called it a kind of lead, and still others treated it as something entirely unknown. The confusion reflected how little Europeans understood about zinc, a state of ignorance that would persist until the 18th century. Under the Qing dynasty, which succeeded the Ming in 1644, Chinese zinc production continued to grow. New smelting sites were established in central and southern China, where rich deposits of zinc ore provided raw material for an industry that was expanding rapidly. Archaeologists have studied these later furnaces and found sophisticated designs that allowed metalworkers to process a wider variety of ores with greater efficiency, a testament to centuries of patient experimentation and refinement. The scale of Chinese zinc production during this period was enormous by the standards of the pre-industrial world. The monetary system's endless appetite for brass coins meant that zinc mines operated continuously across the southern provinces. The government recognized zinc as a strategic resource and sometimes imposed controls on its production and trade. Some of this zinc traveled far beyond China, carried by ships to markets in Southeast Asia, Japan, India, and Europe. The trade route connecting China to Spanish America through the Philippines, the famous galleon trade, occasionally included zinc among its mixed cargoes. Chinese zinc was quietly becoming one of the first metals to travel the globe. Beyond coins, Chinese craftsmen used zinc in many other ways. The warm yellow brass of temple bells, incense burners, and ceremonial vessels owed its distinctive color and pleasing sound to carefully measured mixtures of copper and zinc. The metal also appeared in traditional Chinese medicine, where zinc compounds were used to treat skin problems and digestive troubles, echoing the medical uses that had been established in the Mediterranean world more than 1,000 years earlier. The question of how Chinese and Indian zinc traditions relate to each other is one of the most interesting puzzles in the history of metalworking. Both civilizations independently learned to produce pure zinc. Both used downward distillation techniques with sealed pots. Both were driven primarily by the need for brass. The Indian achievement came first by several centuries at least, but the Chinese tradition developed its own distinctive solutions. Whether the basic idea of zinc distillation traveled from India to China along the ancient trade routes, or whether Chinese metalworkers arrived at the same answer through their own experiments, remains an open question. What is certain is that by the 1600s, China had surpassed India as the world's largest zinc producer, a position it would hold, lose to European industry in the 1800s, and then reclaim in the late 20th century. Today, China produces roughly 1/3 of the world's zinc, a dominance that echoes the Ming dynasty's central role in zinc production 5 centuries ago. And so we turn now to another tradition, another part of the world where zinc was being studied and used in ways that would eventually shape the future of the metal. In the bustling city of Kufa, in what is now southern Iraq, sometime in the 8th century, a scholar was conducting experiments that would lay some of the earliest foundations of modern chemistry. Working with crucibles, glass vessels, and furnaces in a laboratory that combined the tools of a practical metalworker with the grand ambitions of a philosopher, this scholar, known as Jabir ibn Hayyan, classified the known substances of his world into 3 groups: spirits which turned to vapor when heated, metals and stones, the minerals and earths that did not melt or vaporize under ordinary conditions. It was a system of remarkable clarity, and it contained one particular detail worth pausing on tonight. Jabir listed zinc among the metals, recognizing it as a distinct substance at a time when European scholars would not reach the same understanding for another 700 years. Whether Jabir was a single person or a name used by a school of scholars working together over several decades is something historians still debate. What matters is that the writings bearing his name represent one of the most systematic early attempts to understand the nature of materials. And their treatment of zinc tells us that the scholars of the Islamic world had a more advanced understanding of this metal than is often appreciated in Western histories. The Islamic world's greatest contribution to zinc knowledge may have been in medicine. Arab and Persian physicians developed a preparation of zinc oxide that became one of the most important medicines in the medieval world, used primarily for treating diseases of the eye. This treatment was applied to inflamed, infected, or irritated eyes, conditions that were painfully common in the dusty, sunlit environments of the Middle East and North Africa. The preparation involved collecting zinc oxide from smelting furnaces, washing and purifying it through repeated cycles, and mixing it with ingredients such as rosewater, camphor, and saffron to create ointments suited to specific conditions. One of the greatest physicians of the era worked in Baghdad in the 9th and 10th centuries, heading the hospital there and later directing another hospital near modern-day Tehran. He was among the most productive medical writers of the medieval world, and he classified zinc oxide preparations among the essential tools for treating eye diseases. His formulations were copied and adapted by doctors across the entire Islamic world, from the hospitals of Cairo to the medical schools of southern Spain. The preparation of high-quality zinc oxide became a specialized skill in itself, with different regions developing their own techniques. Persian preparations were generally considered the finest, but those from India, Egypt, and North Africa each had their supporters. Another great physician of the 11th century, whose medical encyclopedia would dominate both Islamic and European medical teaching for more than 600 years, also described zinc preparations in detail. He recommended them for eye diseases, skin conditions, and wound care, and his instructions for preparation and dosage reflect a mature tradition that had been refined over many generations of careful practice. When European doctors eventually adopted these treatments during the Renaissance, they were following prescriptions that had been tested and improved by Islamic physicians for centuries. Beyond medicine, zinc compounds found their way into several other fields across the Islamic world. In glassmaking, zinc oxide was used to create the milky white or pale blue glass that adorned mosques and palaces from Spain to Central Asia. In ceramics, zinc-bearing minerals contributed to the lustrous surfaces of Islamic pottery, including the famous shimmering ware produced in Egypt and Iraq. And in the developing science of fireworks and explosives, zinc contributed to the brilliant white flashes that accompanied certain displays, taking advantage of zinc's natural tendency to burn with a bright bluish-white flame. The scholars of the Islamic world also engaged deeply with a question that had captivated thinkers for centuries: could base metals be turned into gold? Zinc played an interesting role in these discussions precisely because of its connection to brass. The fact that adding a common stone, calamine, to reddish copper could produce something that looked very much like gold was tantalizing to anyone who dreamed of transmutation. If a worthless rock could turn copper into something golden, then perhaps the transformation of metals was not merely a dream, but something achievable with the right knowledge and the right techniques. The golden color of brass fed the hopes of scholars across the Islamic world, and later in Europe, and many spent years experimenting with zinc ores in pursuit of the secret of making gold. The irony, of course, is that the transformation of copper into brass was indeed a kind of change, not into gold, but into a new and useful alloy, though the scholars of the time could not have understood the chemistry that made it so. The knowledge accumulated by Islamic scholars eventually made its way to medieval Europe through several paths. In the 12th and 13th centuries, a great translation movement centered in Toledo, Sicily, and other places where the Islamic and Christian worlds met, brought Arabic scientific and medical texts into Latin. The works attributed to Jabir were translated and became foundational texts for European study of materials and metals. Italian scholars working in Spain translated dozens of Arabic works, including medical texts that contained detailed instructions for preparing and using zinc oxide treatments. The pharmaceutical knowledge of the Islamic world, including the use of zinc for eye care, was absorbed into the European medical tradition and remained in use for centuries. Trade routes also carried zinc materials westward. The Islamic world sat at the crossroads of global commerce, connecting the zinc-producing regions of India and China with the markets of the Mediterranean and Europe. Arab merchants transported zinc bars, brass goods, and medicinal preparations across vast distances from the ports of western India and southern China to the great markets of Baghdad, Cairo, and Damascus. These trade networks were, in a very real sense, the pathways through which zinc flowed from the producing east to the consuming west, long before European ships began making the journey themselves. The legacy of Islamic engagement with zinc is often overlooked in the standard telling of history, which tends to jump from Roman brass straight to European zinc smelting as though the 1,000 years between them were empty. In reality, those centuries were a period of real progress, during which scholars classified zinc among the known metals, doctors developed zinc-based medicines of genuine value, craftsmen used zinc compounds to create some of the most beautiful glass and pottery ever made, and trade networks ensured that zinc materials circulated across 3 continents. When European scholars finally turned their full attention to zinc in the 1500s and 1600s, they were building on knowledge that had been assembled, tested, and passed along by their predecessors in the Islamic world. Around the year 1248, in a monastery in the city of Cologne, one of the most learned men in medieval Europe was writing about metals. This Dominican friar, known as Albertus Magnus, a philosopher and naturalist whose encyclopedic knowledge had earned him the title of universal teacher, was compiling a work on minerals, drawing on ancient Greek sources, Arabic translations, and his own decades of observation. When he came to the subject of brass making, he offered a practical tip that reveals both the depth and the limits of European knowledge at the time. He suggested sprinkling crushed glass on top of the mixture in the crucible to help prevent the escape of something volatile during the heating process, which would produce a more golden brass. It was sound advice. The glass, melting into a layer of liquid on top, would have formed a seal that trapped some of the zinc vapor inside the pot. Albertus could see the symptom: something valuable was escaping as a vapor without understanding the cause. He was not familiar with zinc as a separate metal. He could observe the disappearing act, but could not name the magician. Medieval Europe's relationship with zinc was defined by this frustrating gap between what people could do and what they could understand. European metalworkers had been making brass since Roman times, using calamine from deposits scattered across the Rhineland, the river valleys of what is now Belgium and parts of England. One town in eastern Belgium was so closely associated with the zinc mineral that it took its name from it. The region near the German city of Aachen developed into one of the most important brass-making centers in Europe, and another town along the Meuse River became so famous for its brass products that the entire industry took its name, a word meaning brass work from that region, which covered everything from church candlesticks to kitchen pots. Generation after generation of brass makers heated calamine with copper, watched the metal turn golden, and shipped the result to markets across northern Europe. But throughout this entire period, stretching more than 1,000 years, no one in Europe could explain what calamine actually was or why it had the power to transform copper. The confusion ran deeper than simple ignorance. When zinc did occasionally appear as a metallic substance, condensing by accident in the cooler parts of a furnace, it was easily mistaken for other metals. Zinc has a silvery blue color that looks much like tin. It is brittle at room temperature, which makes it feel like certain other metals. And when it vaporizes and comes into contact with air, it produces a fluffy white powder that looks like compounds of several other elements. The writings of medieval scholars are filled with references to mysterious white substances, sometimes called philosopher's wool, that were almost certainly zinc oxide, but were attributed to various other causes. The first real breakthrough in European understanding came with a Swiss-born physician named Paracelsus, one of the most colorful and controversial figures of the Renaissance. Born in 1493, he spent his life traveling across Europe, quarreling with the medical establishments of every city he visited and writing with a fiery intensity. Around 1526, in a brief passage of just one page, Paracelsus described a substance he called zincum, asserting that it was a new metal with properties unlike any other known substance. It was a revolutionary claim. He was saying that the world contained a metal that the ancient Greeks had not classified, that the great medical authorities had overlooked, and that the entire European tradition of metalworking had missed. The word zinc itself probably comes from a German word meaning prong or point, a reference to the jagged, needle-like crystals that form when zinc solidifies after being heated and cooled. Some scholars have suggested a connection to the German word for tin, reflecting the visual similarity between the two metals. Whatever its origin, the name stuck, and zinc entered the European vocabulary. But recognizing zinc as a distinct metal was very different from being able to produce it. The fundamental problem was the same one that had defeated everyone before. To freeze zinc from its ore required temperatures above 1,000 degrees. But zinc boils at 907 degrees, which means that any zinc liberated from its ore immediately became a gas. And if that gas touched air, it instantly turned back into a white powder. European furnaces were designed to collect molten metals in pools at the bottom of the smelting chamber, and they simply could not capture a metal that existed only as vapor at the relevant temperatures. The solution, as we have already heard, had been practiced in India for centuries, sealed pots arranged so that the vapor traveled downward into cooler chambers. But European metalworkers did not know about this technique. They knew that metallic zinc existed because they could buy it from Asian traders, and they sometimes found small deposits of it condensed in the cooler parts of their furnaces. But they could not produce it reliably or in useful amounts. This gap between knowing a metal and being able to make it lasted for more than 200 years after Paracelsus first gave zinc its name, from roughly 1526 until the 1740s, when European chemists finally solved the puzzle. During those 2 centuries, various experimenters made attempts with mixed results. The great German expert on mining, whose detailed book on the subject published in 1556 is one of the best records of 16th century metalworking, described zinc compounds and their connection to brass, but could not explain how to produce the pure metal. Some tinkerers managed to capture small amounts by modifying their furnace designs, using longer tubes or cooling systems to catch the vapor before it could turn back into powder. But these were small-scale curiosities, not practical processes. The zinc that European industries needed continued to come primarily from Asia, imported through the trading companies of Portugal, the Netherlands, and England. The difficulty of isolating zinc is perhaps best appreciated by comparison. Iron, copper, tin, lead, gold, and silver had all been smelted since ancient times using a straightforward approach: heat the ore with charcoal and collect the molten metal that pools at the bottom. Even mercury, the only other common metal that is volatile at moderate temperatures, could be produced by simple distillation because its boiling point is low enough to reach easily, but high enough to allow condensation with basic equipment. Zinc fell into a uniquely awkward zone, its boiling point too high for simple distillation and too low for conventional smelting. It was, as one historian described it, the problem that refused to be solved by any standard method, and cracking it would require a new way of thinking that European science did not achieve until the age of industry was already dawning. In the warehouses of the Dutch Trading Company in Amsterdam, sometime in the late 1600s, clerks were cataloguing a shipment of metal bars that had arrived from trading posts in the Indian Ocean. The bars were silvery blue, surprisingly heavy for their size, and utterly baffling to European metalworkers who examined them. The Dutch traders called them metal by a word borrowed from Portuguese merchants who had been importing the same mysterious substance from India and Southeast Asia for over a century. The Portuguese, in turn, had picked up the name from Malay or Tamil traders, who had their own words for the metal that Indian smelters had been producing at Zawar and other sites since the 12th century. By the time the bars reached Amsterdam, the metal had traveled thousands of miles and passed through half a dozen languages, accumulating confusion at every stage. The trade in Indian zinc to Europe is one of the most remarkable examples of technological imbalance in the early modern world. India could produce pure metallic zinc, and Europe could not. This meant that for roughly 3 centuries, from the arrival of Portuguese ships in India in 1498 until European zinc smelting finally succeeded in the 1740s, all the metallic zinc used in Europe had to be imported from Asia. It was an extraordinary situation for a metal that European industries needed in growing quantities, and it created a dependency that European governments found deeply uncomfortable. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to trade directly with India by sea. After their ships reached the western coast of India in 1498, Portuguese traders quickly set up a network of trading posts, and from these bases they purchased zinc bars from local merchants who had access to the output of the Rajasthani mines. These bars were shipped back to Lisbon alongside the more celebrated cargoes of pepper, cinnamon, and silk. For the Portuguese crown, zinc was a secondary product, useful but not glamorous, and it rarely attracted the same attention in official records as the spices and precious stones that were the main targets of the Eastern trade. The Dutch expanded this trade significantly in the 1700s. Dutch merchants operating from their trading posts across Asia recognized the commercial value of zinc and included it among the metals they shipped to Europe. The Dutch kept meticulous records, documenting everything from the weight of individual bars to the names of the ships that carried them, and these records provide some of the best evidence for the scale and nature of the early zinc trade. Dutch ships carried zinc alongside other Asian metals, tin from the Malay Peninsula and copper from Japan, creating a web of metal trades that connected production centers across Asia to the workshops and factories of Europe. The English Trading Company was also involved. English traders in Western India bought zinc from the same local middlemen who supplied the Portuguese and Dutch, and the metal was shipped to London for use in brass making and other industries. As the English brass industry grew, especially in the manufacturing centres around Birmingham and Bristol, the demand for zinc increased, and the company's zinc shipments became an important source of raw material. The English word Smelter, still used in the industry today as a term for commercial-grade zinc, may have roots in the Dutch language, reflecting the origins of English zinc imports. The journey was not without danger. Shipwrecks were a constant risk in the age of sail, and the waters of the Indian Ocean, the South China Sea, and the Atlantic swallowed countless cargoes of metal along with their ships. Metal bars, because they are dense and do not rot, are among the most common artifacts found on old wreck sites. Underwater archaeologists have recovered zinc bars from several wrecks dating to the 1500s through the 1700s, providing physical evidence of trade routes and metal compositions that adds detail to the written records. These bars, often stamped with merchant marks or cast in distinctive shapes that identify where they came from, allow researchers to trace the movement of zinc from specific regions to specific markets with a precision that documents alone cannot provide. Chinese zinc also entered the picture, adding another layer to the trade. Zinc produced in the southern provinces of China reached European markets through the ports of Canton and Manila. Some was carried directly by European ships trading with China, while some was transshipped through the busy ports of Southeast Asia. The trade route connecting China to Spanish America through the Philippines occasionally included zinc among its mixed cargoes, though zinc was never as commercially significant as silk or porcelain on that route. Throughout this entire period, Europeans remained confused about what zinc actually was. Different traders and different markets used different names for it. Some authorities classified it as a form of tin, others as a relative of another metal entirely, and still others treated it as something wholly new. This confusion was not just academic. It affected customs duties, trade regulations, and pricing. A substance that could not be clearly defined was difficult to tax, difficult to regulate, and difficult to trade efficiently. The importance of the zinc trade should not be underestimated. Zinc was essential for brass production, and brass was one of the most important metals of the era. It went into scientific instruments, clock mechanisms, navigational equipment, military hardware, decorative arts, and the growing brass industries of Belgium and the English Midlands. Without Asian zinc imports, European brass production would have been limited to the old method of heating copper with calamine, which could make brass but could not produce metallic zinc for direct mixing. The ability to add zinc directly to copper, in precise amounts, gave metalworkers far more control over the quality and properties of their brass. The trade also had political dimensions. European powers competed for access to Asian zinc sources just as they competed for spices, textiles, and other goods. The desire to break free from this dependency on imports was one of the motivations that drove European scientists and businessmen to develop their own zinc production in the 1800s. When an English industrialist finally succeeded in producing zinc commercially at Bristol in the late 1730s, it was not merely a scientific achievement, but a strategic one, promising to free English industry from its reliance on imports that arrived slowly, expensively, and at the mercy of rival naval powers. And so the story of the zinc trade reminds us that the global economy has deeper roots than we sometimes imagine, and that the movement of humble industrial materials across oceans can be just as historically important as the movement of luxury goods. The zinc bars that traveled from Zawar to Amsterdam were not glamorous, but they were essential, and the trade that carried them connected distant civilizations in ways that shaped our modern world. In 1742, in the old mining town of Falun in central Sweden, a mining engineer named Anton von Swab heated a sample of calamine with charcoal in a sealed vessel and collected a silvery blue metal that condensed in the cooler part of his equipment. It was pure zinc, produced by a European for the first time through a deliberate, documented experiment. Swab understood the importance of what he had done. Falun was already famous for one of the oldest and most productive copper mines in Europe, and Swab's work placed him at the meeting point of ancient mining tradition and modern scientific inquiry. That same year, he was honored by the Swedish Royal Academy of Sciences. But Swab did not share his results widely, and his achievement remained largely unknown outside Scandinavian circles. 4 years later, in 1746, a German chemist named Andreas Sigismund Marggraf conducted a more thorough investigation in Berlin. Working at the Prussian Academy of Sciences, Marggraf heated calamine with charcoal in closed vessels, carefully leaving copper out of the process to prove that the resulting metal was not brass, but something entirely different. His experiments were precise, his descriptions careful, and his conclusions clear. Calamine contained a metal that was neither copper nor tin nor lead, but something all its own. Marggraf published his findings in the Academy's official records, providing the kind of detailed, repeatable account that the scientific world demanded. For this reason, Marggraf is often given credit as the European discoverer of zinc, even though Swab had achieved the same result 4 years earlier and an English industrialist had already been producing zinc commercially for several years before either of them. That English industrialist was William Champion, a brass trader from Bristol and a member of the Quaker community that played a remarkably large role in early English industry. Champion had been experimenting with zinc smelting since the early 1730s, and by 1738 he had developed a process that worked well enough to deserve a patent. His method used a sealed furnace with a downward condensation system, a design that bore strong similarities to the Indian technique used at Zawar. Whether Champion learned about the Indian method from descriptions brought back by trading company contacts or arrived at it through his own work has been debated by historians. The resemblances are striking enough to suggest some connection, though definite proof has not been found. This three-way story, Swab in Sweden, Marggraf in Germany, and Champion in England, illustrates a pattern common in the history of science. When the time is right for a discovery, it tends to happen in several places almost at once. By the early 1700s, European chemistry had advanced to the point where isolating zinc was within reach. The idea of distinct metallic elements was becoming clearer, laboratory techniques were improving, and the growing demand for zinc from brass makers and other industries was creating strong reasons for anyone who could produce it locally rather than importing it expensively from Asia. Swab's contribution was mainly practical. As an engineer rather than a philosopher, he was interested in the commercial possibilities of zinc production rather than in claiming scientific priority. Marggraf's contribution was mainly intellectual. His published work gave the scientific community a clear, trustworthy description of what zinc was and how to produce it. He was a meticulous experimenter, and his account became the standard reference for researchers who came after him. Champion's contribution was industrial. He was the first European to produce zinc in large quantities, and his factory at Warmley, east of Bristol, was the first commercial-scale zinc works on the continent. But Champion's story also shows the risks of industrial innovation in that era. Despite his technical success, he was a poor businessman. The costs of building and running the Warmley works were enormous, and he could not compete on price with the cheaper zinc being imported from India and China. The process consumed vast amounts of charcoal, driving up costs at a time when English woodlands were already under strain from the iron industry and other demands. Champion's financial difficulties mounted over the years. Legal disputes, the expiration of his patent, and competition from new rivals all wore down his position. By the late 1760s, the situation had become unbearable. In March of 1769, his works were advertised for sale in a Bristol newspaper. Champion was declared bankrupt and spent his remaining years in quiet obscurity, dying in May of 1789 at the age of 84. His was a story of brilliant technical innovation defeated by the harsh reality of competing with established Asian suppliers who had a 600-year head start. But the failure of Champion's business did not mean the failure of European zinc smelting. Others learned from his experience and developed better, more economical methods. A new horizontal approach, in which the sealed vessels were laid on their sides rather than standing upright, was developed independently by engineers in Silesia and Belgium. This design was easier to operate, more efficient, and cheaper to scale up. A professor of chemistry at the University of Liège was especially important in this story. Napoleon himself granted this professor a license to mine zinc at a site called La Vieille Montagne, the Old Mountain, a decision that would have consequences stretching far beyond what anyone could have imagined, eventually creating a tiny country that existed solely because of its zinc. The race to smelt zinc in Europe was, looking back, a race that India had won centuries earlier. But it was also a race that changed the trajectory of the global zinc industry. Once European producers could make their own zinc, the centuries-old reliance on Asian imports began to unravel, and the center of gravity of global zinc production began its long shift from east to west, a shift that would not be reversed until the late 20th century, when China reclaimed its ancient position as the world's dominant zinc producer. And it is to one of those European pioneers, and the remarkable factory he built, that we turn next. William Champion was born in April of 1710 into a family that sat at the crossroads of Quaker faith and industrial ambition. His father was a Bristol merchant, and his grandfather had been a close friend and business partner of the man who revolutionized the English iron industry by smelting with coke instead of charcoal. The Champions were connected to a network of Quaker industrialists who were transforming the English economy, a community barred from political office and university education by law, who channeled their considerable energies into commerce and manufacturing instead. William grew up surrounded by talk of metals, furnaces, and the commercial possibilities of new technologies in a family and a faith community where industrial innovation was both a livelihood and a calling. After 6 years of careful experimentation, testing different furnace designs, ore preparations, and ways of capturing zinc vapor, Champion developed a process for producing zinc on a commercial scale from Calamine ore. His system used sealed vessels arranged vertically, with zinc vapor condensing in cooler chambers below, a design that shared its fundamental principles with the Indian method used at Zawar centuries earlier. In 1738, he secured a patent for his invention, one of the earliest patents granted for a metalworking process in England. The first zinc smelting took place in the centre of Bristol, in a building called Baber's Tower in the Old Market District. The operation was small but produced enormous quantities of poisonous fumes. Zinc smelting creates thick clouds of white smoke, and the sulfur from the ore added a choking, acidic quality that corroded ironwork, withered plants, and made breathing difficult for anyone within range. The residents of Old Market, already accustomed to the smells and noise of a busy commercial area, drew the line at Champion's furnaces. Complaints were filed, petitions circulated, and by 1742, Champion was forced to find a new location. He found it at Warmley, a rural village about 5 miles east of Bristol, where he had room to build on a scale impossible in the crowded city. And Champion did not merely relocate his zinc operation. He created something more ambitious, an integrated industrial complex that was genuinely new for its time. The Warmley works combined copper smelting, brass making, and zinc production on a single site, an arrangement that foreshadowed the great factory complexes of the following century. Raw copper arrived at one end, calamine and charcoal entered the zinc furnaces, and finished brass products came out the other end. It was the idea of controlling the entire chain from raw material to finished product before anyone had a name for that idea. To finance this venture, Champion formed partnerships with fellow Quakers who brought money, connections, and complementary skills. One partner, a Bristol merchant, had ties to other industrial operations that linked Champion's zinc enterprise to the broader Quaker business network. Another partner, a Birmingham ironmonger whose family would later found one of the most enduring banks in British history, brought both capital and knowledge of the market. Together, they formed a company, and by 1748, the Warmley site was in full production. At its peak, the Warmley Works was the largest producer of zinc in all of Europe. The complex employed hundreds of local workers, including miners who dug calamine from nearby hills, furnace operators who managed the zinc vessels, and brass workers who turned the zinc into finished alloys and products. Champion also invested in the welfare of his workers, building housing and creating facilities that reflected the Quaker concern for the well-being of employees. The estate included gardens, fish ponds, and what was said to be the largest brass statue in England at the time, a gilded figure of the sea god Neptune standing in a grotto on the grounds, a monument to both Champion's pride in his products and his ambition to create an industrial estate that was also a place of beauty. But the economics of 18th century zinc smelting were brutal. The process consumed enormous quantities of charcoal, which was becoming increasingly expensive as English woodlands were depleted by competing demands from the iron, glass, and brewing industries. A single season of zinc smelting required thousands of loads of wood, and the zinc produced at Warmley had to compete with cheaper imports from India and China, which arrived at Bristol's port having been produced with the more abundant labor and fuel of the Asian economies. Champion's patent offered some protection from domestic rivals, but it could not overcome the fundamental cost disadvantage of producing zinc in a country where fuel was scarce and labor expensive compared to Asia. The quality of Warmley zinc was also uneven. The process was difficult to control precisely, and the purity of the final product depended heavily on the quality of the ore and the skill of the furnace operators. Buyers who had grown accustomed to the consistently high quality of Indian zinc were sometimes disappointed by the variability of Champion's product, and some went back to purchasing Asian imports despite the higher shipping costs. These problems accumulated year after year, and Champion's debts grew faster than his income. He was not a skillful financial manager, and the scale of his ambitions consistently outran his resources. By the late 1760s, the situation had become untenable. In March of 1769, the Warmley works were advertised for sale in a local Bristol newspaper. Champion was declared bankrupt, and the works passed into other hands. Champion spent his last 2 decades in quiet obscurity, living modestly in Bristol while the zinc industry he had helped create evolved beyond recognition. He died in May of 1789 at the age of 84. By then, new zinc smelting methods developed on the continent, particularly the horizontal approach being refined in Germany and Belgium, were already overtaking his original design. The physical remains of Champion's Warmley works are surprisingly well preserved today. A clock tower, gardens, and pools still reflect Champion's vision of something more than a mere factory. Several structures on the site are officially recognized as historically important buildings, among the earliest surviving examples of industrial architecture in Europe. The grotto where the brass Neptune once stood still exists, though the statue itself has long since disappeared. Champion was not the first person to smelt zinc. That honor belongs to the nameless metalworkers of Zawar. He was not the first European to isolate zinc. That credit goes to Swab. And he was not the most commercially successful zinc producer of his era, but he was the first to attempt zinc production on a European industrial scale, and his success, however financially ruinous it proved, showed that the Asian monopoly on metallic zinc could be broken. Every European zinc operation that followed built on the foundation Champion had laid at Warmley, and the idea of an integrated industrial complex that he created there was ahead of its time by 100 years. In 1806, in the industrial city of Liege, in territory that was then part of Napoleon's French Empire, a chemistry professor named Jean-Jacques Daniel Dony received a special decree from the authority. He was given the right to mine zinc ore at a site called La Vieille Montagne, the Old Mountain, near the small town of Kelmis. Dony had spent years developing a better way to smelt zinc, using horizontal vessels instead of the vertical ones Champion had used at Bristol, and he had presented his work to Napoleon's government, arguing that French-controlled territory could produce its own zinc rather than depending on imports. Napoleon, always attentive to matters of industrial self-sufficiency, approved the idea, and Dony set about turning a hillside into an industry. Dony opened his first zinc factory in Liege in 1809, and with it, he launched what would become the zinc capital of the world. His horizontal design was a real improvement over Champion's earlier approach. The vessels, roughly a meter long and about the width of a man's forearm, were laid on their sides in a furnace and packed with a mixture of roasted ore and charcoal. When heated, the zinc vaporized and traveled through the length of the vessel to condense in a clay cup attached to the cooler end. The horizontal arrangement was easier to load and unload, allowed for longer vessels that improved the condensation process, and could be scaled up simply by adding more vessels to the furnace. A single furnace could hold dozens of them, all working at the same time. It was an approach that Champion's vertical system could not match for sheer throughput. Doney's factory thrived, but Doney himself did not live to see the full flowering of what he had started. He died in 1819, just a decade after opening his first factory. The enterprise he had built continued to grow under new management, and in 1837 it was reorganized as a formal company named after the old mountain mine. This company, the Vieille Montagne Company, would become the world's oldest and largest zinc producer, a position it held for more than a century, its name becoming a shorthand for industrial zinc production across Europe. The company's growth was powered by the extraordinary quality of the ore at Kelmis. The deposit contained some of the purest calamine in Europe, and its location in the rolling hills near the border made it accessible to the industrial networks of both Belgium and Germany. At its height, the mine employed around 300 workers and produced more than 8,000 tons of crude zinc per year, a remarkable output for a single operation. The ore was so pure that it needed very little preparation before smelting, giving the company a significant cost advantage over competitors who had to work with lower-grade material. But the company did not rely on a single mine. As the Kelmis deposit began to show signs of running dry after 1860, the company aggressively expanded, acquiring mining rights across Europe and beyond, building a global network that stretched from Scandinavia to North Africa. When the calamine deposits that had fueled the early industry started to run out, the company shifted to processing a different type of zinc ore, a sulfur-bearing mineral that was far more common worldwide, but required an extra roasting step. That roasting released enormous clouds of sulfur fumes that devastated vegetation and fouled the air around the smelting towns. But it also created an opportunity. The sulfur could be captured and turned into a useful industrial chemical, converting a pollutant into a source of income. The Belgian zinc industry was not limited to this one company. A cluster of zinc smelters and processing works grew up around Liège and in the neighboring parts of southern Belgium, creating an entire industrial community built around zinc. Belgian zinc sheets became the standard roofing material across much of northern Europe, valued for their durability, their ability to be bent and shaped by hand, and their elegant grey colour. Belgian expertise in working with zinc was exported to other countries through training and licensing agreements, and workers trained in Belgium carried their skills to zinc operations across the continent. The success of the Belgian zinc industry was closely tied to the broader transformation of Europe during the 1800s. The demand for zinc grew enormously, driven by the building boom that came with growing cities, the expansion of railways, and the development of galvanizing technology. Zinc was needed for roofing, for gutters, for corrugated sheets, for coating iron and steel, and for the brass that went into everything from ship fittings to ammunition casings. Belgium's central location, its well-developed canals and railways, and its closeness to major markets in France, Germany, and Britain gave its zinc industry advantages that other producers struggled to match. The boom also left its mark on the people who worked in it. The smelting towns of the Meuse Valley developed a distinctive culture, with entire communities organized around the rhythms of the zinc works and families employed in the same operations for generations. Workers faced harsh conditions, including exposure to zinc fumes that caused recurring illness and sulfur smoke that damaged crops, forests, and health in the surrounding countryside. Improvements came slowly, driven by the gradual organization of workers and the eventual intervention of government regulation. By the late 1800s, the Belgian zinc industry was facing new competition. German producers in the east were expanding rapidly, benefiting from lower costs and access to their own rich zinc deposits. New sources were being developed in Australia, North America, and South America. And the development of a new electrical method of refining zinc in the early 1900s would eventually make the Belgian horizontal furnace obsolete, replacing centuries of fire-based tradition with a completely different approach that used electricity instead of heat. The legacy of the Belgian zinc boom persists in many forms. The original company, after a long series of mergers, became part of a major global producer that still has its headquarters in Brussels, a living link to Donny's original enterprise. A brand that traces its heritage directly to Donny's company still produces zinc roofing and cladding that adorns buildings across Europe. And the industrial landscape of the Meuse Valley still carries the marks of 2 centuries of zinc production, from the old waste heaps and abandoned smelter sites to the distinctive grey-green tone of zinc roofs on the older buildings of Liège and the surrounding towns. In the summer of 1816, in a conference room where diplomats were redrawing the map of Europe after Napoleon's final defeat, a small but troublesome problem arose. The great powers had been carving up territories and reassigning provinces with confident authority, building what they believed would be a permanent peace. But there was one tiny patch of land, a triangle of barely 3.5 square kilometers near the town of Moresnet, that neither the Kingdom of Prussia nor the United Kingdom of the Netherlands was willing to give up. The reason was not strategic importance or scenic beauty or historical pride. The reason was zinc, specifically a mine called the Altenburg, the richest deposit of Calamine in Europe, which sat right in the disputed territory and which both powers wanted for their growing zinc industries. Unable to agree on who should have it, the diplomats did something extraordinary. They agreed to disagree. The territory was declared neutral, placed under the joint supervision of Prussia and the Netherlands, with neither side exercising full control. It was meant to be temporary, a placeholder until a proper solution could be worked out. It lasted 103 years. Neutral Moresnet, as the territory came to be known, was one of the strangest little countries in European history. It was a place that existed solely because of a zinc mine, governed by 2 foreign powers who shared authority over it, inhabited by a population that grew from a few hundred people in 1815 to nearly 5,000 by 1914. It had no army, no independent courts, and no clear framework for deciding who was a citizen or what laws applied. Residents lived under a patchwork of rules administered by 2 commissioners, one from each ruling power, who met from time to manage the territory's affairs. Some residents were subject to one country's laws, some to the others, and a third group fell into a legal grey area where neither set of rules clearly applied. The real power in neutral Moresnet was the mining company. The Vieille-les-Montagnes Company, which held the mining rights that Napoleon had originally granted, employed most of the working population, operated the mine that was the territory's reason for being, and exercised an influence over daily life that went far beyond its official role. The mine drew workers from neighboring countries, and the population grew with immigrants attracted by the prospect of employment. The territory developed an unusually cosmopolitan character for such a small place, with residents speaking German, French, Dutch, and a local dialect that borrowed from all 3. The absence of clear sovereignty gave neutral Moresnet certain peculiar benefits. Residents were exempt from military service, since neither ruling power could claim them as citizens eligible for the draft. This made the territory attractive to young men from surrounding areas who wished to avoid conscription, and the population grew partly through this immigration. The territory also became known for lower taxes and fewer regulations than the neighboring states, attracting small businesses and creating a modest commercial district. And here the story takes a rather charming turn. In 1907, a local doctor named Wilhelm Molly proposed something that sounds almost too whimsical to be true. He wanted to make neutral Moresnet the world's first state to adopt a constructed international language called Esperanto as its official tongue. Molly, an enthusiastic supporter of the language, argued that Esperanto would be perfect for a territory whose residents already spoke several languages and whose political neutrality made it an ideal symbol of international cooperation. He proposed renaming the territory with an Esperanto word, meaning place of friendship, and establishing it as a sovereign republic. The idea actually gained some support. Several residents learned the language, and a public gathering was held in the town in August of 1908 to endorse the proposal. A coat of arms was designed featuring the green star of the Esperanto movement, and an international Esperanto Congress declared neutral Moresnet the world capital of their community. Molly even designed stamps for the proposed state, some of which survive today as collector's items. It was a lovely utopian vision of a zinc mining micronation transformed into a beacon of understanding between peoples, and for a brief, hopeful moment, it seemed as though it might actually happen. But the great powers had other plans. Prussia rejected the proposal firmly, and Belgium, which had replaced the Netherlands as the other governing power after Belgian independence in 1830, supported the rejection. And by the time the Esperanto idea was being debated, the diplomatic landscape had shifted dramatically. The European powers were building the alliance systems that would lead to the First World War, and the fate of a tiny zinc mining territory was not high on anyone's list. The war came to Moresnet in 1914, and with it, the end of neutrality. German troops crossed the territory without resistance in the opening days of the conflict. And in 1915, Germany formally claimed the land, though other nations never recognized the claim. Residents were subjected to German law and German military service for the duration of the war. When the fighting ended, the Treaty of Versailles settled the question that had been left open for a century, assigning the territory to Belgium, where it has remained ever since. The zinc mine that had created neutral Moresnet outlived the little country it had spawned, but not by much. The deposit was largely exhausted by the late 1800s, and by the early 20th century the mine was effectively spent. Today, the former mine site is a residential neighborhood in the town of Kelmis, and nothing on the surface suggests that this quiet area was once the center of a zinc empire that shaped the political map of Europe. The story of neutral Moresnet is sometimes treated as a curious footnote, an amusing anecdote about the absurdities of politics among nations. But it is more than that. It is a demonstration of how a single natural resource can create realities that outlast empires, redraw borders, and attract the dreams of idealists. The diplomats at the Congress of Vienna could divide continents and reassign kingdoms, but they could not agree on who should own a hill full of zinc ore. The metal that had hidden inside brass for thousands of years, invisible and unnamed, had become valuable enough to create a country. And with that thought, let us turn now to a discovery that would make zinc more valuable still. In 1742, a French doctor and chemist presented a paper to the French Royal Academy of Sciences describing something simple but rather remarkable. He had dipped pieces of iron into a bath of molten zinc, and the resulting zinc coating prevented the iron from rusting. He recognized the commercial potential, but the world was not ready. Zinc was still expensive and hard to get, and the iron industry had not yet grown to a size where rust prevention would become a pressing concern. His observation was noted, filed away, and largely forgotten for nearly a century. It was another Frenchman, a civil engineer named Stanislas Sorel, born in 1803 in the Norman countryside, who turned this observation into something that would change the world. Sorel was a man of varied interests, holding patents for inventions ranging from dental materials to methods for preserving wood. In May of 1837, he filed a patent describing what he called a method of protecting iron from rust. He outlined two approaches: dipping iron into a bath of molten zinc and painting iron with a coating that contained zinc powder. The name he gave the process, galvanization, was borrowed from an Italian scientist whose experiments with electricity and frog legs in the 1780s had founded a new field of science, though the process itself has nothing to do with electricity and everything to do with the chemistry between zinc and iron. Sorel's real breakthrough was not just the act of dipping iron in zinc, which had been described before, but the preparation of the iron surface beforehand. He discovered that cleaning the iron with a weak acid, then treating it with a special salt solution, dramatically improved how well the zinc coating stuck. This preparation removed the crusty scale from the iron surface and created a chemically receptive base that allowed the molten zinc to bond properly, forming a thin alloy layer at the boundary between the two metals. The result was a coating that could withstand bending, shaping, and the stresses of daily use without flaking or peeling. The science behind why galvanization works so well is worth lingering on for a moment. Zinc is more chemically active than iron, which means that in the presence of moisture, zinc will corrode first, sacrificing itself to protect the iron beneath. This is not simply a barrier effect like paint, which only works as long as the surface remains unbroken. Even if the zinc coating is scratched or chipped, exposing the iron beneath, the zinc continues to protect the iron by corroding in its place. It is, in a very real sense, a metal that gives its life to save another, a slow-motion sacrifice that plays out over decades as the zinc gradually turns into a layer of white corrosion products that themselves form a secondary shield. Can you picture that for a moment? A metal that protects another metal not by standing between it and the rain, but by quietly taking the damage on itself, corroding so that the iron does not have to. It is a partnership between two metals that is almost poetic in its selflessness. The practical result is that galvanized steel is extraordinarily long-lasting. A properly coated steel structure can endure 50 to 100 years in ordinary conditions, and even in harsh coastal or industrial environments, the zinc provides decades of protection. The economic impact is enormous. Before galvanization, iron and steel structures required constant repainting, frequent repairs, and periodic replacement as rust weakened them. Galvanizing reduced maintenance costs dramatically and extended the useful life of steel far beyond what had previously been possible. The effect on the 19th century world was transformative. The construction industry adopted galvanized steel for roofing, walls, and structural supports. The farming industry used it for fencing, water tanks, grain storage, and farm buildings, changing the economics of agriculture across the developed world. The railway industry used galvanized steel for track fittings and bridge parts. The shipping industry used it for hulls and rigging hardware. And the new telegraph and telephone companies used galvanized steel wire for the vast networks of communication lines being strung across continents, enabling the information revolution of the late 1800s. Perhaps the most visible product of galvanization was the corrugated sheet, first manufactured in the 1820s and widely adopted once galvanizing made it resistant to rust. Corrugated galvanized sheeting became the defining building material of colonial and industrial expansion, used for everything from Australian outback homesteads to military barracks in India, from South African mining camp shelters to the factory sheds of the American Midwest. Its rippled profile became a visual symbol of practicality and modernity across the developing world, and it remains one of the most widely used building materials on Earth. In large parts of Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America, corrugated galvanized roofing covers millions of homes, chosen for its durability, its affordability, and the ease with which it can be put up. The galvanizing industry grew rapidly in the second half of the 1800s. Plants were established across Europe and North America, and the demand for zinc as a coating material became one of the main drivers of zinc production worldwide. Today, galvanizing remains zinc's single most important use by a wide margin. Roughly half of all zinc produced globally, some 6 to 7 million tons per year, goes into coating steel to protect it from rust. The process has been refined continuously since Sorel's day. Modern production lines can run steel sheet through a bath of molten zinc at high speed, coating it in a continuous process. Electrical methods can deposit thinner, more uniform layers suitable for car body panels and other applications where appearance matters. And the principle of sacrificial protection extends beyond coatings. Blocks of zinc attached to the hulls of ships, the legs of offshore oil platforms, and the surfaces of underground pipelines slowly corrode to protect the vastly more expensive steel structures they are connected to. These sacrificial blocks are replaced from time to time, a small price to pay for protecting things worth millions. Sorel could not have imagined the scale of what his patent would create, but he grasped the fundamental insight that made it possible, that zinc, properly applied, could save iron from its greatest weakness. It was a partnership that would shape the modern world, a marriage of strength and sacrifice that continues to protect the bridges, buildings, ships, and pipelines on which civilization depends. Stand on the top floor of the Eiffel Tower on a clear day and look out across Paris. What you see, stretching to the horizon in every direction, is a sea of silver-grey rooftops that gives the city its distinctive, almost dreamlike skyline. Those rooftops are zinc. 85% of the roofs in central Paris are covered with zinc sheeting, and together they form one of the most recognizable urban landscapes on Earth. This vast expanse of metal exists because of one man's vision of urban transformation and one metal's perfect suitability for the task. The man was Baron Haussmann, and his task was nothing less than the rebuilding of Paris. In 1853, the Emperor Napoleon III appointed Haussmann to modernize a city that was still in many ways medieval. The old Paris was a maze of narrow, dark, unsanitary streets where diseases killed thousands, where the stench of open sewers filled entire neighborhoods, and where the memory of revolutionary barricades haunted every French ruler. Napoleon wanted wide boulevards, grand avenues, modern sewers, parks, and a city that could project the elegance and power of his empire to the world. Haussmann's renovation required the construction of tens of thousands of new buildings in roughly 2 decades of continuous building. The iconic apartment buildings of the New Paris, with their cream-colored stone facades, wrought iron balconies, and steep mansard roofs, became the standard architectural unit of the city. Building rules specified nearly everything, from the height of the buildings to the angle of the roofs to the materials that could be used. And those distinctive mansard roofs, with their steep upper sections and gentler lower slopes, needed a roofing material that was lightweight, easy to shape, resistant to water, and available in large quantities at a reasonable price. Zinc arrived at exactly the right moment. The Belgian zinc industry, centered in the Meuse Valley just a few hundred miles to the northeast, was producing zinc sheet in industrial quantities. The metal's properties were ideal for Parisian construction. Zinc sheeting was considerably lighter than slate or tile, reducing the load on the buildings beneath and allowing architects to design the elaborate roof shapes that became the signature of the New Paris. It was flexible enough to be formed into curved dormers, rounded surfaces, and the ornamental details that gave the architecture its distinctive elegance. It was waterproof, resistant to corrosion in the mild Parisian climate, and could be installed fairly quickly, an important consideration given the speed of Haussmann's building program. The workers who installed and maintained these zinc roofs became known by a French word meaning zinc roofers, and their craft developed into a specialized trade with its own techniques, tools, and traditions. They worked at heights that would alarm any modern safety inspector, climbing the steep mansard slopes with sheets of zinc, solder, and hand tools, secured by nothing more than their own skill and experience. Their main tool was a portable folding machine that allowed them to bend zinc sheet into the precise angles and curves needed for each installation. The work required both physical courage and careful craftsmanship, because a poorly installed zinc roof would leak, buckle, or blow away in the wind, and a mistake 7 stories up could be fatal. A specialized group among the zinc roofers worked in workshops rather than on rooftops. These craftsmen made the decorative elements that adorned the ridgelines, dormers, and edges of zinc roofs, ornamental crests, window surrounds, and elaborate zinc sculptures that sit atop many of Paris's grandest buildings. Using techniques that combined metalworking with artistry, they hammered, soldered, and shaped zinc into forms that imitated the stone and bronze ornament of classical architecture. From the street below, these zinc decorations are often impossible to distinguish from their far more expensive counterparts, an illusion that was entirely deliberate and that speaks to the remarkable skill of the people who created them. The result of all this work is the Parisian skyline that tourists photograph and painters have captured for more than a century. From the Impressionists who painted the play of light across the rooftops to modern photographers who capture the zinc expanse at dawn and dusk when the metal catches the changing sky. The zinc roofs, which slowly develop a protective layer as they age, take on their characteristic silver-grey color within a few years and then remain stable for decades. This natural aging is part of the beauty. A fresh zinc roof is shiny, almost mirror-like, but with time it softens to a gentle matte grey that complements the warm cream of the limestone walls below. This quiet aging gives the Parisian skyline its understated elegance, a quality quite different from the bright shininess of glass and steel that defines most modern cities. The craft of the zinc roofers was officially recognized in 2017 when it was added to France's list of important cultural traditions. In 2024, the International Heritage Organization UNESCO went further, adding the skills of Parisian zinc roofers to its list of the most important cultural traditions of humanity. The honor was given not to a building or a monument, but to a living craft, to the knowledge that exists in the hands and eyes of working people who maintain one of the world's most beloved urban landscapes. Today, approximately 500 of these skilled workers maintain Paris's zinc roofs, repairing and replacing the sheeting that Haussmann's builders first installed more than a century and a half ago. The work remains demanding and highly specialized, with training lasting several years. Climate change is beginning to pose new challenges as rising temperatures and stronger storms place new stresses on the zinc sheeting. Some experts worry that the roofs may need to be adapted to handle conditions that Haussmann's engineers never anticipated. But for now, the zinc roofs of Paris endure, as they have endured since the days of Napoleon III. The zinc roofers who maintain them are the keepers of a tradition stretching back to the mid-1800s, and the rooftops they care for are as much a part of Paris's identity as its famous tower or its grand avenues. Zinc, the invisible metal that hid inside brass for thousands of years, found in Paris its most visible and most beautiful expression. And now, let us cross the Atlantic where zinc was shaping a very different landscape. In the rolling prairies where the states of Kansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma meet, the land tells a story that most Americans have never heard. Enormous mounds of gray-white rubble, some rising 30 meters above the flat landscape, stretch across an area of roughly 2,500 square miles. These are called chat piles, the crushed limestone waste left behind by a century of lead and zinc mining, and they are among the most visible scars of industrial activity anywhere in the United States. Beneath these piles, beneath the abandoned shafts and collapsed tunnels, lies the story of the Tri-State Mining District, which for 100 years, from roughly 1850 to 1950, produced half of the zinc and a tenth of the lead consumed in the entire country. The zinc boom in this region began in the years before the Civil War, when prospectors discovered rich deposits of zinc and lead ore in the shallow limestone formations beneath the prairie. The geology was ideal for early mining. The ore sat close to the surface, typically less than 100 feet down, embedded in soft rock that could be dug out with picks and shovels. The mining was initially small-scale, carried out by individual miners and small partnerships using hand tools, much like the gold rush operations happening at the same time in California. But the demand for zinc grew rapidly in the second half of the 1800s, driven by the expansion of galvanizing, brass making, and zinc paint production, and the Tri-State District grew with it. By the early 1900s, the district had become one of the most productive mining regions in the world. The town of Joplin, Missouri, on the eastern edge of the district, grew from a frontier settlement into a prosperous city of 30,000 people, with fine hotels, paved streets, electric trolley lines, and a commercial district that rivaled those of much larger cities. The wealth was visible in the ornate houses that lined the residential avenues. Smaller towns nearby were equally dependent on the mines, their populations rising and falling with the price of zinc. The mining operations were characterized by a combination of feverish productivity and shocking carelessness. The mines were mostly shallow, the ore was crushed and concentrated in local mills, and the waste was simply dumped on the surface, forming the enormous chat piles that now define the landscape. Nobody gave any thought to what the waste contained or what it might do to the soil, the water, or the people who lived nearby. The crushed rock held significant amounts of lead, zinc, and other toxic metals, but in an era when there were no environmental rules and the prosperity of the mines was the only measure of success that mattered, the waste was simply left where it fell. The town of Pisher, Oklahoma, was perhaps the most striking example. Founded in 1913 on the Oklahoma side of the border, Pisher grew rapidly to a peak population of around 20,000 during the two world wars, when military demand for zinc and lead drove production to record levels. The zinc from Pisher's mines went into brass cartridge casings, galvanized military equipment, and countless other products the war effort required. The town's entire economy depended on the mines, and the prosperity of the war years masked the environmental damage accumulating beneath the surface and in the growing mountains of waste surrounding the town. When the mines began to close in the 1960s, as the richest deposits were used up and foreign competition undercut American zinc prices, Pisher's decline was swift and devastating. The population drained away as miners left to find work elsewhere. Businesses closed. The town's infrastructure decayed. What remained was the environmental legacy, the chat piles, the contaminated water, and the abandoned tunnels that ran like a honeycomb beneath the streets. The reckoning came in the 1980s. In 1983, the government declared the area one of the most polluted locations in the United States. The contamination was thorough and terrible. Heavy metals had leached from the waste piles and the old mines into the soil, the groundwater, and the surface streams of the entire region. The creek that ran through the heart of the district flowed orange with dissolved metals. The shallow underground water that had once supplied drinking water to local communities was so contaminated that it was declared unusable. The health consequences for the people who remained were severe. Studies found that children in the area had dangerously elevated levels of lead in their blood, leading to learning difficulties and behavioral problems that would follow them for the rest of their lives. The district also holds the sad distinction of being the first place in the United States where wild birds were found to be suffering severe effects of zinc poisoning in the natural environment. In 2006, the federal government offered to buy out the remaining residents of Pisher, paying homeowners the pre-contamination value of their properties to encourage them to move away. A tornado in 2008 that killed 6 people and damaged much of what was left of the town accelerated the departure. In 2009, the municipal government of Pisher officially dissolved, and within a few years the town had ceased to exist entirely, joining the growing list of American ghost towns created not by the exhaustion of gold or silver, but by the environmental aftermath of everyday industrial mining. The cleanup of the area has been underway since the 1980s, but progress has been slow, expensive, and contentious. Millions of dollars are spent each year, and the state has arranged for tens of millions of tons of contaminated gravel to be removed for use as fill material in road construction, a practical if somewhat unsettling recycling of toxic waste into the infrastructure of daily life. The story of the Tri-State District is not unique, but it is perhaps the most extreme American example of the environmental costs of zinc mining. Similar patterns of intensive extraction, careless waste disposal, community prosperity followed by community collapse, and an environmental legacy that outlasts everything else, played out in zinc mining regions across the country. But the Tri-State District also produced something of genuine value: the zinc that galvanized the steel that built American infrastructure, the zinc that made brass for American ammunition, the zinc that coated the nails and screws of American construction. The metal that destroyed Pisher also built the bridges, barns, and buildings that defined the American landscape. That contradiction between zinc's usefulness and its environmental cost is one of the central tensions in the history of this element, and it is nowhere more starkly visible than in the grey wasteland where three states meet. In the quiet town of Franklin, New Jersey, tucked into the rolling hills about 50 miles northwest of New York City, there is a place where rocks glow in the dark. Walk into the mineral display room at the local museum, wait for the guide to switch off the overhead lights and turn on the ultraviolet lamps, and the display cases erupt into color. Rocks that looked dull and unremarkable a moment ago suddenly blaze with brilliant greens, fiery reds, electric blues, and deep oranges. The effect is so startling that first-time visitors often gasp out loud. These are fluorescent minerals, and Franklin, New Jersey is home to the greatest concentration of them anywhere on Earth. The glow comes from zinc. More precisely, it comes from the extraordinary chemistry of the zinc ore deposits at Franklin and its neighboring mine at Sterling Hill, where an unusual geological history created one of the most complex mineral collections on the planet. More than 350 different mineral types have been identified at these two sites, more than at any other mineral location in the world, and dozens of them are found nowhere else. The star performer of the light show is a zinc mineral called willemite. Under ultraviolet light, it glows an intense, almost electric green that can linger for several seconds after the light source is removed. The glow is caused by tiny amounts of another element substituting for zinc in the crystal structure, and the particular chemistry of the Franklin deposits ensures that virtually all the willemite found there fluoresces strongly. The white marble that surrounds it responds to the ultraviolet light with a deep red glow, and the contrast between the green willemite and the red marble creates a visual spectacle that has made Franklin specimens among the most treasured by mineral collectors worldwide. The history of mining at Franklin stretches back to colonial times. The first recorded discovery of zinc ore at the site dates to the 1640s, when Dutch settlers in the region noted the unusual minerals in a local hillside. Small-scale mining began in the 1700s, and commercial zinc mining started in earnest in the 1800s as the growing American zinc industry created demand for local ore. The geology that created these deposits is itself a story worth telling. Roughly 1 billion years ago, hot fluids rich in zinc and other metals flowed through ancient rocks on the seafloor, depositing zinc minerals in what was then a shallow ocean environment. Over the vast stretches of time that followed, those rocks were buried deep underground, subjected to intense heat and pressure that transformed the minerals, and then slowly lifted back to the surface. It was this transformation, this billion-year journey from seafloor to hillside, that concentrated the zinc into massive deposits and created the unique crystal structures that produce the fluorescence. Without that ancient geological journey, the Franklin deposits would not exist, and the world would be missing one of its most beautiful natural wonders. In the 1800s, a company called New Jersey Zinc became the main operator of the Franklin mine and developed it into one of the most productive zinc mines in the eastern United States. The mine went deep underground with shafts and tunnels following the zinc ore body far into the bedrock. This company was more than just a mining operation. It became a center of innovation, and it was here that a new family of zinc alloys was developed in 1929 that would transform manufacturing across the 20th century. Alloys so pure that they solved a destructive problem that had plagued zinc products for decades. But that is a story for a later chapter. The mine created its own community and culture. Franklin was a true company town, with the zinc company providing not just jobs, but housing, schools, and community facilities for the miners and their families. The workforce was a mix of nationalities, with waves of immigrants from Italy, Poland, Hungary, and other European countries arriving to work the underground tunnels. The miners developed particular skills in handling the unusual ore body, which was embedded in marble that could fracture unpredictably. Safety was always a concern, and the deep shafts and narrow tunnels of the later years tested the skill and nerve of everyone who worked below ground. The Franklin mine finally closed in 1954 when the ore was used up. But the Sterling Hill mine nearby continued operating for another 3 decades, ceasing production in 1986. Today, both sites are preserved as museums and educational centers. The Franklin Mineral Museum houses one of the world's finest collections of fluorescent minerals, while the Sterling Hill Mining Museum offers tours of the abandoned underground workings. Both attract mineral collectors, geology students, and curious visitors from around the world, drawn by the rare chance to see fluorescent minerals in their natural geological setting. The scientific importance of these deposits extends well beyond their visual beauty. The extraordinary variety of minerals found here has been invaluable to the study of geology, providing reference specimens for dozens of newly identified minerals and contributing to our understanding of how the Earth's interior works over immense spans of time. Several minerals discovered at Franklin are named for the place itself, a tribute to the site's importance in the history of Earth science. For the story of zinc, the Franklin and Sterling Hill mines represent a unique place where geology, industry, and wonder meet. The same element that had hidden inside brass for 3,000 years, that had frustrated European chemists and enriched Indian metalworkers, had also created, through the slow, patient work of geological time, one of the most beautiful natural displays on Earth. The rocks that glow green and red in the darkness of the Franklin Museum are, in a sense, zinc making itself visible at last, expressing through light the hidden energy locked inside its atoms. It is a fitting tribute to a metal that spent most of human history being invisible, and it leads us now to a very different side of zinc's story, the toll it took on the people who worked with it. On Monday mornings, in brass foundries and zinc smelting works across the industrialized world, workers reported for their shifts knowing they would likely spend the day fighting an illness that had no cure. By mid-morning, the first symptoms would appear: a metallic taste in the mouth, a tightness in the chest, a dry cough. By afternoon, the fever would set in, along with chills, headache, aching muscles, and a deep fatigue that made even standing difficult. By evening, the worst cases would be shaking uncontrollably, drenched in sweat, running high temperatures. And by the following morning, Tuesday, the symptoms would be fading. By Wednesday, most workers felt well enough to get on with their routines. By Friday, they had recovered completely. And on Monday, the whole cycle would begin again. This was a condition known by many names over the centuries: brass founders' fever, Monday morning sickness, smelter chills, spelter's shakes, and a dozen other terms that reflected how common the illness was and how many different workplaces it appeared in. The weekly pattern was its most distinctive feature. Symptoms were always worst on Mondays after a weekend away from the fumes, and gradually lessened through the week as the body developed a temporary resistance. That resistance vanished over the weekend, and Monday's exposure would hit as hard as ever. The cause was the breathing in of zinc oxide fumes, those tiny white particles generated whenever zinc or zinc-containing alloys were heated to temperatures where the zinc turned to vapor and then combined with oxygen in the air. The resulting particles were small enough to reach the deepest parts of the lungs, where they triggered an immune response that produced the familiar flu-like symptoms. The body was essentially overreacting, treating the zinc particles as an invasion similar to a virus, which is why the symptoms so closely resembled a bad case of influenza. The workers most affected were those in direct contact with hot zinc or zinc alloys. Brass foundry workers who poured molten brass into molds, zinc smelter operators who tended furnaces and pots, workers who dipped iron and steel into baths of molten zinc for galvanizing, and welders who cut or joined galvanized steel. All these occupations brought people into contact with clouds of white zinc oxide fume that filled the workplace and was breathed by everyone nearby. The working conditions in the zinc and brass works of the 1800s and 1900s were appalling by modern standards. Air circulation was minimal. Protective equipment did not exist, and awareness of health risks was virtually zero. Workers in the Belgian zinc smelters, the English brass works, and the American zinc factories worked in air so thick with white fume that visibility was sometimes reduced to a few feet. The effects went beyond the weekly bouts of fever to include long-term breathing problems, digestive troubles, and a general decline in health that shortened lives and strained families. The weekly rhythm of the illness was a source of considerable medical curiosity. The temporary tolerance that built up during the work week was lost over the weekend, so that Monday's exposure always brought the worst symptoms. This pattern was so reliable that some workers deliberately exposed themselves to small amounts of zinc fume on Sunday evening, hoping to get a head start on building up their tolerance before Monday's shift. Others simply resigned themselves to the weekly misery as an unavoidable cost of having a job. Understanding that zinc oxide fumes were the cause came slowly. For much of the 1800s, the illness was blamed on cold drafts in the foundry, contaminated water, or the general unhealthiness of factory life. The specific identification of zinc oxide as the cause emerged gradually from careful medical observation, and it was not widely accepted until the early 1900s. Even after the cause was known, improvements were slow to arrive. The zinc and brass industries resisted regulation, arguing that the fever was a minor inconvenience rather than a serious health problem, and that the cost of better air systems would make their businesses uncompetitive. Workers who complained risked losing their positions, and in communities where the smelter or foundry was the only major employer, economic dependence kept many people silent. The labor movement eventually forced changes. Unions representing metal workers negotiated for better air circulation, shorter shifts in the most dangerous areas, and medical monitoring. Government rules beginning in the early 1900s and strengthening significantly after the Second World War set limits on how much zinc oxide fume could be present in a workplace and required employers to provide breathing protection and health checks for exposed workers. Today, the condition remains a recognized workplace hazard, particularly among welders who work with galvanized steel. Modern safety guidelines recommend protective masks, local air extraction systems, and training in recognizing and preventing zinc fume exposure. But following these rules is uneven, especially in small workshops and construction sites where oversight is difficult. The story of this occupational illness is, in small form, the story of workplace health itself. A long, slow journey from ignorance to understanding to regulation, driven by the suffering of workers who paid for industrial productivity with their own well-being. The zinc that coated the steel that built the modern world extracted its own toll from the people who worked with it, and the recognition of that toll was one of the hard-won achievements of the labor and public health movements of the past 2 centuries. And as we shall see, the way zinc was produced was about to change dramatically in a way that would reduce some of those dangers while creating entirely new ones. In 1916, in the remote mountain town of Trail, British Columbia, where the Columbia River cuts through the Selkirk Mountains, engineers built a new kind of zinc plant that would transform the entire industry. This plant used electricity, not fire, to extract zinc from its ores, producing 30 tons of pure zinc every day through a process that was cleaner, more precise, and capable of making zinc of a purity that no furnace could match. It was the beginning of a revolution that would make the old fire-based smelters of Belgium and Germany as outdated as the clay pots of ancient Zawar. The idea behind this new method is fairly straightforward, though making it work at factory scale took decades of patient work. First, the zinc ore is roasted in enormous furnaces to convert it into a form that can be dissolved. Then this material is dissolved in acid to create a liquid solution. That solution is carefully cleaned to remove impurities, any of which could ruin the final product. The cleaned solution is then pumped into large rectangular tanks containing rows of metal sheets. When an electrical current is passed through the liquid, the zinc in the solution slowly deposits itself as a layer of pure metal on the sheets. After a couple of days of continuous electrical processing, the zinc-coated sheets are lifted out and the zinc is peeled off, stacked, melted, and cast into bars ready for sale. The advantages of this electrical method over the old fire-based approach were decisive. The purity of the zinc was far higher, typically exceeding 99.95%, compared to the 98 or 99% achievable in a furnace. This high purity was essential for the growing industry of zinc die casting, which needed extremely clean zinc to avoid a destructive problem that plagued products made from less pure metal. The electrical method also eliminated the need for the enormous quantities of charcoal or coal that the old smelters consumed, and it produced far fewer of the atmospheric emissions that had blighted the smelter towns of Europe for generations. The development of this technology at Trail was driven by a specific challenge. A nearby mine contained an enormous deposit of complex ore in which zinc and lead were so tightly mixed together that separating them using conventional furnace methods was extremely difficult. The electrical process offered a way around this problem because the dissolving and cleaning steps could selectively pull the zinc out of the complex mixture while leaving the lead behind for separate treatment. The timing was not coincidental. The First World War had created enormous demand for zinc needed for brass ammunition casings, galvanized military equipment, and the batteries that powered field communications. The war also disrupted the European zinc supply, as the Belgian smelters that had dominated world production were overrun or damaged during the German invasion of Belgium in 1914. Canadian zinc production, previously a small part of the world market, suddenly became strategically important. The Trail plant responded by operating at full capacity, producing zinc for the war effort. By the end of the war, the plant had demonstrated that the electrical process could work reliably at a large industrial scale. Trail was not the only pioneer. In 1917, just a year later, construction began on an electrical zinc plant in Tasmania, on an island off the southern coast of Australia. This plant was designed to process zinc from the rich deposits at Broken Hill in New South Wales, and it grew rapidly, producing 10 tons a day by 1918 and 100 tons a day by 1921. By the late 1920s, the Tasmanian plant had become the largest zinc refinery in the world. The choice of Tasmania was strategic. The island had abundant water power to generate the cheap electricity that the electrical process demanded, and its location near shipping routes made it an efficient point for exporting refined zinc to markets around the world. Between the wars, the technology improved rapidly. New and more efficient designs for the electrical cells were developed. The cleaning process was refined to remove ever smaller traces of impurities. Capacity expanded to meet markets that increasingly preferred high-purity zinc. The Second World War brought another surge in demand. Zinc was classified as a strategic material by the Allied governments, and production at Trail and other plants was pushed to the maximum. The war also accelerated the adoption of the electrical method by other producers, as the military need for high-purity zinc exceeded what the old furnace smelters could deliver. After the war, the electrical method continued to replace fire-based smelting as the dominant technology. New plants were built in Australia, Europe, Japan, and eventually China. The old furnaces that had been the backbone of the industry since Dhoni's day were gradually shut down. A major innovation came in 1984 when the Trail plant completed an upgrade that allowed it to process zinc ore directly without the energy-intensive roasting step, further improving efficiency. The upgraded plant, with a capacity of more than 270,000 tons per year, was the largest of its kind in the world. Today, the electrical method accounts for roughly 90% of all zinc production on Earth. The horizontal furnaces that once lined the valleys of Belgium and the plains of Central Europe have been retired, their technology preserved only in museums and history books. The Trail plant, now operated by a different company following mergers, continues to produce zinc using essentially the same principles first applied there in 1916, though the modern plant would be unrecognizable to the engineers who built the original. The Tasmanian plant continues to operate as well, more than a century after its founding. The Electrical Revolution did more than change how zinc was made. It changed what zinc could be. The availability of extremely pure zinc enabled new uses in die casting, electronics, and specialized alloys that would have been impossible with the less pure product of furnace smelting. It was this revolution that made zinc the versatile industrial metal it is today, and it was the remote mountain towns of Western Canada and Southern Australia, perched on opposite sides of the Pacific, that quietly led the way. In the summer of 1917, as the Western Front consumed men and material at a rate that defied comprehension, the American government confronted a crisis that had nothing to do with troop numbers or battle plans. The crisis was zinc. American industry could not smelt, alloy, and deliver zinc fast enough to meet the military's enormous appetite for brass ammunition casings, galvanized steel, and zinc batteries. The shortage was not caused by a lack of ore in the ground. The problem was processing capacity, the furnaces and smelters that turned raw ore into usable metal. New estimates called for more than 300,000 tons of zinc per year just for ammunition brass. It was a lesson the government would remember, and one that would shape zinc policy for the rest of the century. Zinc's military importance rested on three things: brass, galvanization, and batteries. Brass. That ancient alloy of copper and zinc was the standard material for rifle and artillery cartridge casings. The brass cartridge case was one of the defining technologies of modern warfare, enabling the rapid-fire weapons that made the First World War so devastating. Cartridge brass was roughly 70% copper and 30% zinc, and every bullet fired by every soldier on every front required a brass casing. The consumption was staggering. Between 1914 and 1918, the warring nations fired roughly 1 billion artillery shells, each one requiring its share of zinc. A single day's bombardment on the Western Front could use up millions of casings. Galvanized steel was equally essential. Military equipment of every kind, from vehicles and weapons to barbed wire and field shelters, needed protection from rust, and galvanizing was the most effective and affordable method available. The trenches of the Western Front were a corrosion nightmare, where mud, water, and chemicals destroyed unprotected steel within weeks. Barbed wire alone consumed enormous quantities of galvanized steel, and the hundreds of miles of wire strung across the space between opposing trenches represented a significant portion of wartime zinc demand. Zinc batteries, meanwhile, powered the field communications equipment that coordinated military operations. Radios, telephones, and signaling devices all depended on batteries, and the most common battery type of the era used a zinc component. The demand for military batteries ran into the millions of units per year. Without reliable communications, coordinated artillery strikes, troop movements, and supply logistics were impossible, making zinc batteries a quiet but critical part of the war machine. The experience of the First World War taught the major powers that zinc supply was a strategic weakness that needed to be managed ahead of time. Between the wars, governments built stockpiles of zinc and other critical metals, and military planners included zinc supply in their assessments of national readiness. In 1939, as the clouds of war gathered again, the American government passed legislation authorizing the accumulation of reserves of zinc, copper, tin, and other metals deemed essential for defense. When the Second World War began, zinc once again became critical. In February of 1942, just 2 months after the attack that brought America into the war, the government began offering premium prices for zinc to encourage increased production. Strict controls were imposed on civilian use. Products that had formerly used zinc were redesigned to use substitute materials, and non-essential zinc consumption was cut wherever possible. The most visible domestic impact of wartime zinc conservation was a change to American coins. In 1943, the mint replaced the familiar copper penny with a zinc-coated steel cent, freeing up copper for military brass. These steel pennies, nicknamed steelies by the public, were unpopular from the start. They were easily confused with dimes because of their silvery color. They rusted quickly if the thin zinc coating was damaged, and they were rejected by many vending machines. The mint produced over 1 billion of them for just that 1 year before switching back to a copper-based composition in 1944, using recycled brass gathered from spent cartridge casings collected from battlefields and training grounds. Germany faced its own zinc challenges. The German military consumed enormous quantities of zinc, but domestic resources were limited. The invasion of Belgium in 1940, which placed the zinc smelters of the Meuse Valley under German control, was motivated in part by the desire to secure Belgian zinc production. As Allied bombing progressively damaged German and Belgian smelting operations in the later years of the war, zinc shortages contributed to the declining quality of German military equipment. By 1944, Germany was experimenting with steel cartridge casings to replace brass, a desperate measure that reflected how severe the zinc shortage had become. Japan faced similar problems. Japanese zinc production was insufficient for wartime needs, and the disruption of shipping routes by Allied forces cut Japan off from external sources. Zinc shortages contributed to the deterioration of Japanese equipment quality in the later years of the war, as manufacturers were forced to use inferior substitutes. The Second World War proved beyond any doubt that zinc was a strategic metal of the first importance, as essential to modern warfare as steel or petroleum. Both the United States and the Soviet Union maintained substantial zinc stockpiles throughout the Cold War that followed, and zinc supply considerations influenced defense planning for decades after the last battle of the Second World War had been fought. The connection between zinc and warfare is one of the less celebrated but more consequential aspects of the metal's history. The zinc that coated military vehicles, that hardened the brass of cartridge casings, and that powered the batteries of field radios was as essential to the outcome of the 20th century's great conflicts as any weapon or strategy. It was the invisible metal once again present everywhere, noticed by no one, indispensable to all. And one particular consequence of the wartime experience, the redesign of the American penny, would echo forward in a way that nobody in 1943 could have predicted. In the spring of 1943, something unusual clinked out of cash registers and dropped into fountains across the United States. The new Lincoln pennies looked wrong. Instead of the familiar warm copper glow, these coins were a dull, silvery grey, easily confused with dimes and disturbingly quick to rust. Shopkeepers complained, vending machine operators protested, and the public grumbled. The zinc-coated steel penny, born of wartime desperation, became one of the most unpopular coins the United States Mint had ever produced, and its story reveals how zinc has shaped American money from the Second World War to the present day. The 1943 steel cent was a compromise born of necessity. The copper that normally went into pennies was desperately needed for brass ammunition casings, and the government ordered the mint to find a cheaper alternative. After trying various substitutes, including plastics and even glass, the mint settled on low-carbon steel coated with a thin layer of zinc. The zinc served the same purpose on the penny that it served on galvanized steel everywhere. It protected the underlying metal from corrosion through its tendency to corrode first. But unlike galvanized steel, which spends its life outdoors, the penny was designed to spend its life in pockets, purses, and cash drawers, where the thin zinc coating was quickly worn through by handling, exposing the steel beneath to moisture and sweat. The mint produced more than 1 billion of these zinc-coated steel cents from 3 different mints. They were legal money, but they were a nuisance from the day they entered circulation. Their silvery appearance caused confusion with the 10-cent dime. Their magnetic properties, steel being attracted to magnets while copper is not, caused them to be rejected by machines that relied on magnetic detection to spot counterfeits. The 1943 penny also produced one of the most famous minting errors in American history. A small number of copper blanks from the previous year's production remained in the stamping presses, and a few 1943 cents were accidentally made in copper rather than steel. These copper 1943 pennies, of which perhaps 40 are known to exist, are among the most valuable coin errors in American collecting, with individual specimens selling for over $1 million. Their existence has inspired generations of treasure hunters to check their pocket change, and it has created a busy trade in fake copper 1943 pennies, usually made by coating genuine steel cents with copper. The steel penny experiment lasted only 1 year. In 1944, the mint switched to recycled brass from spent shell casings gathered from battlefields and training ranges around the world. After the war, production returned to the standard copper alloy, and the steel pennies disappeared into collections, junk drawers, and forgotten jars. But their brief appearance had demonstrated a principle that would return decades later. Zinc could stand in for more expensive metals in American coinage. By the late 1970s, the price of copper had risen to the point where the metal in a copper penny was approaching and sometimes exceeding the 1 cent face value of the coin. It was costing the government more to make a penny than the penny was worth, an economic absurdity that called for a solution. The obvious answer was to switch to a cheaper metal for the penny's core, and the obvious choice was zinc, which at the time cost roughly a third as much as copper. In 1982, the mint made one of the most significant changes in the history of American coinage. It switched the Lincoln cent from a traditional copper alloy to a zinc core plated with a thin layer of copper. The new pennies were more than 97% zinc and less than 3% copper, but the copper plating gave them a color nearly identical to the old coins, making the change almost invisible to ordinary people. It was a perfectly zinc maneuver. The metal that had hidden inside brass for thousands of years was now hiding inside a copper penny. The year 1982 itself was a transitional period when both copper and zinc pennies were being produced, creating 7 distinct varieties that are prized by coin collectors. The two types can be told apart by weight. Copper pennies weigh slightly more than 3 grams, while zinc pennies weigh about 2.5 grams. A simple kitchen scale or even a careful hand can reveal which metal lies at the heart of a penny. By 1983, the changeover was complete, and every Lincoln cent since then has been a zinc penny wearing a copper disguise. The zinc penny has been controversial for decades. The penny now costs more to produce than its face value, a situation that has persisted year after year. In a recent fiscal year, producing a single penny cost roughly 2.5 cents, resulting in losses of hundreds of millions of dollars over the decades since the switch. Various proposals to retire the penny have been introduced over the years, but none have succeeded, partly because of support from the zinc industry, which earns significant revenue from penny production, and partly because of the public's sentimental attachment to the coin. The zinc penny also raises an environmental concern that few people think about. Zinc pennies that enter the environment, whether dropped on the ground, tossed into fountains, or lost in landfills, slowly corrode and release zinc into the soil and water. Individual coins pose little risk, but the cumulative effect of billions of zinc pennies over decades is measurable. Studies have found elevated zinc levels in soil around wishing fountains and in waterways that receive urban runoff. Veterinarians have also documented cases of zinc poisoning in dogs that swallowed post-1982 pennies, as the acid in the stomach dissolves the copper plating and exposes the zinc core. The story of zinc in American coinage, from the emergency steel cents of 1943 to the zinc pennies that fill registers today, illustrates a recurring theme. Zinc's ability to substitute for more expensive materials, to do the job quietly and cheaply while attracting little attention or respect, is perhaps its most defining quality. The American public barely noticed the switch from copper to zinc in 1982, just as the Romans barely noticed the gradual loss of zinc from their coins 2,000 years earlier. Zinc remains what it has always been, the invisible metal, doing its work behind a facade of something else. In 1929, in the laboratories of a zinc company in New Jersey, scientists developed a new family of zinc alloys that would quietly change the way the world made things. The alloys were given the name Zamak, a word built from the first letters of the German names for the metals they contained: zinc, aluminum, magnesium, and copper. The main version was 96% zinc with small additions of the other three metals. It was not a dramatic or glamorous invention, but it would go on to shape more objects in more homes than perhaps any other alloy created in the 20th century. The key to Zamak was not its recipe, but its purity. Earlier, zinc alloys used for casting had been plagued by a devastating problem known as zinc pest, a slow, irreversible decay that caused zinc objects to swell, crack, and eventually crumble into powder. The cause was contamination by tiny amounts of lead. Even a few hundredths of a percent of lead could trigger a kind of deep corrosion within the crystal structure of the zinc, gradually destroying the object from the inside out over months or years. Factory workers had unknowingly been the source, tossing scraps of lead, bits of solder, and other soft metal debris into the melting pots along with the zinc, introducing just enough lead to doom the finished product. The problem was so poorly understood that entire batches of zinc products would be shipped, installed, and put to use, only to mysteriously fall apart years later. The New Jersey Zinc Company solved this by insisting on zinc of extraordinary purity, better than 99.99%, produced using their advanced electrical refining process. This ultra-pure zinc was essentially free of the lead contamination that caused zinc pest, and alloys made from it remained solid and stable for decades. The development of Zamak was therefore directly linked to the electrical refining revolution that had made such pure zinc available in the first place. The advantages of Zamak for casting were remarkable. Zinc alloys melt at a relatively low temperature, around 380 degrees, which means that the steel molds used to cast them last far longer because they endure less heat stress than when casting other metals. Engineers estimated that a zinc casting mold could produce several million parts before needing replacement, compared to a few 100,000 for the same mold used with a different metal. The molten zinc flows easily into the finest details of a mold, producing parts with sharp definition and smooth surfaces that often need no further finishing. And the parts are strong, flexible, and can be made to extremely precise dimensions, often eliminating the need for additional shaping that adds cost and time. These qualities made Zamak the material of choice for an enormous range of everyday products. The automobile industry was among the earliest and most enthusiastic users. By the 1950s and 60s, many car parts, from door handles and window cranks to dashboard fittings and mirror brackets, were being mass-produced using zinc casting. The parts could be chrome-plated to a brilliant mirror finish, giving them the look of solid metal while weighing less and costing far less to produce. Bathroom fixtures, including tap handles, towel bars, and shower heads, were cast from zinc alloys that served millions of households. Electrical housings, cabinet hardware, zippers, padlocks, and hundreds of other common objects were manufactured from Zamak, often without the buyer having any idea what metal they were holding. But perhaps the most culturally memorable use of Zamak was in toys. The die-cast toy car, one of the most common playthings of the 20th century, is fundamentally a zinc product. A British company began making small die-cast model cars in 1947, packaged in boxes designed to look like matchboxes, and the series became a global sensation that defined childhood play for millions of children. When a war broke out in 1950, the British government briefly banned the production of zinc-based toys, fearing that zinc reserves might be needed for the military, a restriction that was lifted when the crisis passed. In 1968, an American toy company introduced a competing line of die-cast toy cars that were specifically designed to roll fast and race down bright orange plastic tracks. These tiny cars were made from Zamak alloys, painted in vivid metallic colors and fitted with low-friction wheels. The success was staggering. 16 million cars sold in the first year alone, and the brand has produced new models ever since, with total sales exceeding 6 billion individual cars. Each one is a small monument to zinc die casting technology, a tiny capsule of zinc alloy that has outlasted many of the full-sized cars it was modeled after. The problem of zinc pest, though solved by the development of Zamac, continues to haunt collectors of older die-cast objects. Vintage model trains, toy cars, radios, and other items made from impure zinc alloys before high-purity standards were adopted remain at risk. The process is irreversible. Once the deep corrosion begins, the object is doomed to break apart, no matter how carefully it is stored. Collectors speak of finding treasured vintage toys that have swollen, cracked, and crumbled in their display cases, victims of lead contamination introduced by careless handling in factories half a century or more ago. The difference between identical models, some perfectly preserved and others reduced to fragments, comes down to tiny variations in alloy purity at the factory, a reminder of how much a few invisible impurities can matter. Today, zinc die casting remains one of the most important industrial uses of zinc, consuming hundreds of thousands of tons of the metal each year. Modern machines can produce complex zinc parts at rates of hundreds per hour, with precision measured in hundredths of a millimeter. The Zamac alloys developed in 1929 are still in use today, essentially unchanged, a tribute to the insight of the scientists who created them nearly a century ago. The invisible metal that hid inside brass for 3,000 years had found, in the casting machine, a new kind of invisibility, present in billions of objects, handled by billions of hands, noticed by almost no one. In the year 1800, in the Italian city of Como, a physicist named Alessandro Volta stacked alternating discs of zinc and copper, separated by cardboard soaked in salt water, into a column that crackled with electrical potential. When he connected a wire between the top and bottom of his stack, a steady current flowed, produced by the chemical reaction between the zinc, the copper, and the salt solution. It was the world's first true battery, and zinc was at its heart. It was a momentous discovery, the birth of a new science, and it began a partnership between zinc and electrical power that has lasted more than 2 centuries and shows no sign of ending. Volta's stack was more of a laboratory curiosity than a practical power source, its voltage dropping quickly as the zinc corroded and the cardboard dried out. But it opened the door to a series of improvements that would eventually make portable electricity a reality. In 1836, an English chemist developed an improved design that used zinc and copper in separate liquid solutions, divided by a porous barrier. This produced a more stable voltage and was widely adopted for powering telegraph systems, the first large-scale use of battery technology. Across the expanding telegraph networks of Britain, Europe, and North America, zinc slowly dissolved in acid, turning chemical energy into electrical signals that carried messages at speeds that seemed miraculous. The breakthrough that brought zinc batteries into the modern world came in 1866, when a French engineer invented a design that used a zinc component paired with a mixture of a common mineral and carbon. The liquid that carried the electrical current was a salt solution, much safer than the strong acid used in earlier versions. This new battery was cheaper, more practical, and produced a reliable voltage suitable for a wide range of uses. By the 1880s, batteries of this type were powering doorbells, telephones, and the growing collection of electrical devices that were changing homes and businesses. The next important step was the dry cell, which replaced the liquid inside the battery with a moist paste. This was a transformative change because it made batteries truly portable. Unlike earlier designs that had to be kept upright and could leak corrosive liquid if bumped, dry cells could be carried in any direction, dropped, shaken, and stuffed into pockets without worry. This made them practical for flashlights, portable radios, and the expanding world of battery-powered devices. The dry cell dominated the consumer battery market for the first half of the 20th century. Every flashlight that lit a dark room, Every portable radio that brought news from distant cities, every early gadget that freed its user from needing a wall socket relied on this type of zinc battery for power. The revolution that pushed these older batteries aside came not from a different metal, but from a different chemistry inside the battery. In 1955, a Canadian engineer named Louis Urey, working at a battery company's laboratory in Ohio, was given the task of making the standard zinc battery last longer. Sales were suffering because the batteries ran out too quickly. Urey found that using powdered zinc instead of a solid zinc shell, combined with a different kind of internal liquid, dramatically improved how the battery performed. The powdered zinc had more surface area, allowing the chemical reaction to proceed faster and more completely. To prove his battery worked, Urey built test versions and tried them in some toy cars he bought at a local store. His new battery powered the cars the full length of a hallway at top speed, while the cars fitted with the older type stopped after just a few feet. His supervisors were immediately convinced. Urey patented the new battery in 1959, and the first ones reached store shelves that same year. This battery, known as the alkaline battery, delivered more energy, maintained a steadier voltage, lasted longer on the shelf, and worked better in cold weather. It became the most popular household battery in the world, a position it holds to this day, and zinc remained at its center. A parallel path of development produced another type of zinc battery that uses oxygen from the air itself as part of its chemistry. The idea was explored as early as the 1870s, but practical versions were not developed until the 1970s. The main use has been in hearing aids, where these tiny batteries offer an exceptional combination of small size, long running time, and steady voltage. Once a small tab is removed from the battery, air reaches the zinc inside and power begins to flow. Billions of these batteries are produced and used every year, representing one of the most successful specialized battery types ever created. The future of zinc batteries may prove even more important than their past. Researchers around the world are developing rechargeable zinc-based batteries for storing energy from wind turbines and solar panels. This is a potentially enormous application. The fundamental challenge of renewable energy is that the sun does not always shine and the wind does not always blow, and storing power for later use requires vast quantities of batteries. Zinc offers several advantages over the more commonly discussed lithium for this purpose. Zinc is far more plentiful and cheaper than lithium. Zinc batteries use water-based liquids rather than the flammable solvents used in lithium batteries, making them inherently safer. And zinc is not concentrated in a handful of politically sensitive countries, reducing supply risks. The challenges are real. Rechargeable zinc batteries still face technical problems that limit how many times they can be charged and discharged. But research is progressing rapidly, and several companies have begun installing zinc-based batteries for large-scale power storage in multiple countries. From Volta's simple stack of discs to the hearing aid in a grandmother's ear, from the flashlight under a child's bed to the power grid of the future, zinc has been at the heart of portable and stored electricity for over 2 centuries. It is a partnership that may prove to be one of the most important gifts any single element has given to the human future. In 1782, in the university city of Dijon in eastern France, a chemist stood before a local academy and proposed something that must have seemed bold at the time. He argued that zinc oxide, a compound known since ancient times as a furnace byproduct and a minor ingredient in medicines, should replace the standard white pigment in paint. The motivation was public health. The traditional white pigment was made from lead and it was poisonous. Painters who worked with it suffered from crippling illness and eventual death. Families living in homes painted with it were exposed to slow poisoning that stunted children's growth and damaged adult health. Zinc oxide, the chemist argued, was just as white, just as useful and entirely harmless. It would take another 60 years for the paint industry to listen. The proposal was ahead of its time. Zinc oxide was expensive to produce in quantity, and the paint industry was deeply resistant to change. The lead-based pigment had been the standard for 2,000 years, trusted by generations of painters from the Roman era through the Renaissance. The fact that it killed people slowly and painfully was considered an unfortunate but acceptable cost of doing business in an era when workplace illness was simply the way things were. The turning point came in 1834, when an English art supply company introduced a particularly fine form of zinc oxide under a trade name that suggested an Eastern origin. The product was sold to watercolor painters, who found that it produced a clean, cool, bright white ideal for the transparent washes and delicate effects of watercolor technique. Within a few years, it had become a standard item on the artist's palette, and its success helped establish zinc oxide as a serious alternative to the poisonous lead white. In oil painting, the transition was slower and more complicated. Oil painters valued lead white for its warm tone, its excellent covering power, and its fast drying time, qualities that zinc white could not fully match. Zinc white was cooler in tone, less opaque and slower to dry, and paint made with it was more brittle and prone to cracking. This brittleness has proven to be a long-term problem for art conservators. Studies of paintings by some of the most important artists of the 1800s and 1900s have found that zinc oxide reacts with the oils in paint over time, forming tiny crystal structures that cause the paint layer to become rigid and crack. The problem is not limited to a single artist. Museum restorers have documented this kind of damage in works by several major painters who adopted zinc white in the belief that it was a better, safer material. There is an interesting twist in this story. Laboratory analysis has shown that the Impressionists, as a group, almost entirely avoided zinc white, preferring the traditional lead-based pigment despite its danger. This choice, driven by practical concerns about paint quality rather than health, has actually helped preserve many Impressionist paintings in better condition than later works that embraced the supposedly superior zinc pigment. Outside the art world, zinc oxide found its way into an astonishing range of everyday products. The largest single consumer is the rubber industry. More than half of all zinc oxide produced goes into the process that turns raw rubber into the tough, flexible material used in tires, hoses, gaskets, and countless other products. Without zinc oxide, this process would require much higher temperatures and longer treatment times, making rubber goods significantly more expensive to produce. Every tire on every car, truck, and bicycle in the world contains zinc oxide, a fact that most people have never considered. The medical uses of zinc oxide expanded enormously in the modern era. The familiar pink liquid that has soothed sunburns, insect bites, and rashes for generations of children and adults is essentially a mixture of zinc oxide with a small amount of iron oxide for color. Zinc oxide is the active ingredient in many creams that protect babies from diaper rash, where its mild tightening and barrier-forming properties shield delicate skin from moisture. It appears in wound dressings, antiseptic ointments, and dental materials. And zinc oxide is one of the most common active ingredients in mineral sunscreen, where it works by absorbing and scattering the sun's ultraviolet rays before they can damage the skin. The use of zinc oxide in sunscreen has undergone a remarkable transformation. Early zinc oxide sunscreens were thick, opaque white pastes that lifeguards and cricketers smeared on their noses as a visible badge of sun protection, the white stripe becoming an iconic image of outdoor summer activity. The development of extremely tiny zinc oxide particles in the late 20th century changed the sunscreen market entirely, allowing the creation of transparent formulas that protect against ultraviolet light without the visible white coating. Modern mineral sunscreens are essentially invisible on the skin while providing broad protection against both types of ultraviolet radiation. In ceramics, zinc oxide contributes to certain glaze effects, including dramatic flower-like patterns on pottery. In concrete, it can slow the setting process, useful in hot weather. In animal feed, zinc oxide supplements prevent zinc deficiency in livestock and promote healthy growth. The range of uses is almost bewildering in its breadth. The most remarkable thing about zinc oxide may be the sheer variety of its applications. A single compound that was known to ancient doctors as furnace dust, classified by medieval scholars as a fluffy white mystery, and proposed as a paint ingredient by a provincial French chemist more than 200 years ago, has become essential to tires, sunscreen, ceramics, electronics, animal health, medicine, and a dozen other fields. It is produced globally in quantities exceeding 1 million tons per year, and its uses continue to expand. Zinc oxide is, in many ways, the most democratic form of zinc, the form in which this metal touches the greatest number of lives in the most intimate ways. And as we shall discover next, zinc's role inside the human body turned out to be even more important than anyone imagined. In 1958, in a hospital ward in the Iranian city of Shiraz, a young physician named Ananda Prasad examined a patient who presented a baffling collection of symptoms. The man was severely anemic, with iron levels so low that they should have been life-threatening, and yet he was alive and functioning, if barely. He was also profoundly short for his age, appearing years younger than he actually was, and he showed signs that his body had failed to mature properly. Prasad, who had been born in India in 1928 and trained in medicine there before coming to the United States for further study, was puzzled. The iron deficiency alone did not explain the stunted growth or the failure to mature. Something else was going on, something that the accepted medical wisdom of the day did not address. Prasad's investigation led him to a hypothesis that went against everything the medical establishment believed at the time. He knew that zinc was essential for the growth of plants, fungi, and animals. That had been established by research going back to the 1860s, when a French scientist showed that a common mold could not grow without zinc in its food. He also knew that pigs fed highly processed diets without enough zinc developed stunted growth and skin problems, strikingly similar to what he was seeing in his human patients. But the medical world firmly believed that zinc deficiency in humans was impossible. Zinc was so common in food and water, so widespread in the natural world, that a deficiency seemed inconceivable. If plants could get along fine without special zinc supplements, surely humans, with their varied diets, could never lack such a common element. Prasad was not convinced. The patients before him were not theoretical problems on paper, but real people suffering from real symptoms, and those symptoms matched what was known about zinc deficiency in animals too closely to be a coincidence. In 1961, he published an article in a major medical journal suggesting for the first time that zinc deficiency could explain human growth problems. The paper was careful in its claims, but revolutionary in its meaning. It proposed that an element considered nutritionally unimportant in humans was in fact essential for normal growth and development. The reaction from the medical community was skepticism and, in some quarters, outright dismissal. The idea that zinc deficiency could occur in humans went against decades of settled opinion, and Prasad's evidence, drawn from a small number of patients in a developing country that most Western doctors knew little about, was considered too thin to overturn established thinking. But Prasad persisted with quiet determination. He joined a research group based in Cairo, Egypt, where he had access to more patients, better laboratory equipment, and the institutional support needed for rigorous study. In Egypt, Prasad found more cases that strengthened his argument considerably. He identified a group of severely stunted farmers who showed the same pattern he had observed in Iran: short stature, failure to mature, and anemia. Critically, these patients did not have the parasitic infections that critics had suggested as alternative explanations. When Prasad gave zinc supplements to these farmers, their growth accelerated markedly and their bodies began to mature normally, providing the first direct evidence that zinc deficiency in humans could be both identified and treated. Over the following decades, Prasad and his colleagues conducted study after study that gradually established zinc as an essential human nutrient beyond any reasonable doubt. They showed that zinc supplements could reverse growth problems in deficient populations. They demonstrated that zinc plays a critical role in the immune system, in healing wounds, and in mental development. And they showed that zinc deficiency was far more common than anyone had suspected, particularly in developing countries where diets were dominated by grains and beans that contained natural compounds which bind to zinc in the digestive system and prevent the body from absorbing it. The biology of zinc in the human body, once researchers began to understand it, proved extraordinary in its scope. Zinc is a working part of more than 300 different enzymes in the body, involved in everything from maintaining the right balance of acids in the blood to reading the instructions encoded in our genes. The human body uses zinc in a large family of proteins that help control which genes are turned on and off, and there are roughly 3,000 of these zinc-dependent proteins in the human genetic code, making them one of the most common types of proteins in the body. Zinc is also essential for making new cells, for repairing wounds, and for the proper functioning of both the first response and the more targeted parts of the immune system. The recognition that zinc deficiency was a global health crisis came slowly but with growing urgency. Studies through the 1970s, 80s, and 90s documented widespread zinc deficiency across the developing world, particularly in parts of Africa and South Asia, where grain-based diets provided too little zinc and too much of the compounds that block its absorption. The World Health Organization eventually recognized zinc deficiency as a significant contributor to childhood illness and death, estimating that roughly 1 in 6 people worldwide was at risk of not getting enough zinc. Prasad continued his research for more than 60 years, publishing over 300 scientific papers on zinc and human health. He received numerous honors, including one of Thailand's most prestigious medical prizes. When he died in 2022, at the age of 94, he was universally recognized as the person who had revealed that one of the most common metals on Earth was also one of the most important for human life. His story is a cautionary tale about the limits of medical knowledge and the danger of assumptions that go unquestioned. For more than a century, the medical profession assumed that human zinc deficiency was impossible. It took the persistence of a single physician, working in the developing world with patients that the Western medical establishment paid little attention to overturn that assumption and reveal a health crisis affecting billions of people. The invisible metal had been hiding its importance in plain sight, just as it had hidden inside brass for 3,000 years. In a village in rural Ethiopia, a mother watches her 3-year-old child with quiet concern. The boy is smaller than the other children, slower to speak, and more often sick with stomach trouble and breathing infections. He was born healthy, but somewhere in his first year, his growth began to falter. The family eats what everyone in the village eats, a spongy sourdough flatbread made from a local grain, supplemented with lentils, beans, and whatever vegetables are in season. It is not a starvation diet. The boy gets enough food to survive. But the soil in this part of the Ethiopian highlands is low in zinc, and the crops that grow in it are low in zinc, and the child who eats those crops is low in zinc. In Ethiopia, an estimated 7 out of every 10 people do not get enough of this essential metal. The scale of zinc deficiency around the world is staggering. Roughly 1 in 6 people on the planet is at risk of not getting enough zinc, with the problem most severe in the parts of Africa and South Asia, where people depend on grain-based diets for most of their food. Researchers have estimated that zinc deficiency is responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths among young children each year, and its impact in terms of illness and disability is comparable to that of diseases as well known as malaria and severe diarrhea. The chain of deprivation begins in the soil and ends in the human body. Soils that are naturally low in zinc, whether because of their underlying geology, centuries of rainfall washing nutrients away, or decades of intensive farming without replacing minerals, produce crops with low zinc content. Populations that depend on those crops for most of their calories receive too little zinc. The problem is made worse by natural compounds found in the outer layers of cereal grains and in beans, which bind to zinc in the digestive system and prevent the body from absorbing it. A diet rich in whole grains and beans but low in meat, dairy and fish, which is precisely the diet eaten by much of the developing world because of economic necessity, can provide adequate calories while delivering dangerously little zinc. And unlike iron or certain vitamins which the body can store for weeks or months, zinc must be consumed regularly because the human body has no specialized way to stockpile it. The consequences for children are severe and lasting. Zinc is essential for cell division and growth, and children who do not receive enough of it fail to grow at normal rates, a condition known as stunting. Stunted children are not simply smaller. They are fundamentally compromised in ways that affect them for the rest of their lives. They are more vulnerable to infections, more likely to have difficulty with learning and thinking, and more likely to die from common childhood illnesses like diarrhea and lung infections that a well-nourished child would survive without difficulty. The World Health Organization now recommends zinc supplements as part of the standard treatment for childhood diarrhea in developing countries, recognizing that zinc can make the difference between survival and death for millions of children. The immune system is especially dependent on zinc, more so than on almost any other nutrient. Zinc deficiency weakens nearly every part of the body's defenses, reducing the activity of the cells that hunt down invaders and the cells that coordinate the body's targeted response to specific threats. This weakening helps explain why zinc-deficient children get sick more often and why giving them zinc supplements has been shown to reduce episodes of diarrhea by roughly a quarter and lung infections by roughly 40%. These are not small improvements. They represent hundreds of thousands of lives saved and millions of episodes of illness prevented. Beyond childhood, zinc deficiency affects adults in ways that are less dramatic but no less real. Zinc is needed for wound healing, and people who lack it recover more slowly from injuries. Zinc plays a role in the sense of taste, and deficiency can dull the ability to taste food, reducing appetite and making nutritional problems worse in a vicious circle. Zinc is important for fertility in both men and women, and deficiency can contribute to problems with pregnancy, including premature birth and low birth weight. In older adults, zinc deficiency weakens the immune system and increases vulnerability to infections, a concern that has taken on new importance in a world facing new infectious diseases. Efforts to address the problem fall into several broad approaches. Direct supplementation, giving zinc tablets or syrup to people at risk, works well in clinical trials but requires ongoing funding, distribution networks, and cooperation from populations who may not understand why they need a pill for something they cannot feel. Adding zinc to everyday foods like flour or cooking oil during processing can reach large populations at low cost, but requires a food processing industry that many of the most affected regions lack. A different and potentially more sustainable approach involves increasing the zinc content of crops themselves through plant breeding. An international research program has developed varieties of wheat, rice, and beans that naturally contain more zinc than conventional varieties. These crops have been released for use by farmers in several countries, including India, Bangladesh, and nations across Africa, with promising results in improving the zinc levels of the people who eat them, all without requiring any change in eating habits or cooking methods. The most fundamental solution would be to encourage people to eat more zinc-rich foods such as meat, shellfish, dairy, nuts, and seeds. But this approach runs into economic barriers that are not easily overcome. The populations most affected by zinc deficiency are often those who can least afford the animal-based foods that provide the most usable zinc. The challenge of zinc deficiency reflects a broader truth about the relationship between human life and the elements of the earth. Zinc is one of the most common metals in the planet's crust, present in soils and rocks everywhere. Yet its availability in food depends on a complex chain of soil chemistry, plant biology, and human diet, and its absence from the body produces consequences that are invisible until they become devastating. The hidden hunger of zinc deficiency is a reflection of zinc's own nature, essential, everywhere, and invisible. The story begins, as the best scientific stories sometimes do, with a child and a coincidence. In 1979, a man named George Eby, who worked as a city planner in Austin, Texas, was watching his 3-year-old daughter Karen fight through a common cold while being treated for a serious illness. Karen was taking zinc tablets as part of her treatment, and when she developed a cold, Eby gave her one of the tablets to swallow. But Karen, being 3 years old, did not swallow it. She held it in her mouth, letting it dissolve slowly over several hours, bathing her throat and nasal passages in zinc. Her cold symptoms vanished overnight. A coincidence, perhaps, or perhaps not. Eby, who was a trained scientist, despite his career in city planning, recognized that something interesting might have happened. He knew that cold viruses reproduce in the cells of the throat and nose, and he wondered whether the zinc released from the dissolving tablet might have interfered with the virus right where it was doing its work. The key insight was the difference between swallowing a zinc tablet, which sends the zinc to the stomach, and dissolving one in the mouth, which bathes the throat in zinc. If his hunch was correct, then lozenges specifically designed to dissolve slowly and release zinc into the throat might be an effective treatment for the common cold, one of the last great unconquered nuisances of everyday life. To test this idea properly, Eby organized a formal clinical trial, the kind with randomly assigned groups, where neither the patients nor the doctors knew who was getting zinc and who was getting a dummy lozenge. The study, published in 1984, used zinc lozenges taken every 2 hours while the patient was awake. The results were striking. People in the zinc group had colds that were, on average, 7 days shorter than the group taking the dummy lozenges, a difference that was both statistically meaningful and genuinely noticeable in a way that no previous cold treatment had achieved. The study made headlines around the world, and zinc lozenges immediately became a popular remedy, filling pharmacy shelves alongside the vitamin tablets and decongestants that had long been the public's only weapons against sniffles. But the story did not follow the neat path from discovery to acceptance that medical breakthroughs are supposed to take. Over the next 2 decades, follow-up studies produced wildly inconsistent results that baffled everyone involved. More than a dozen formal trials were published between 1984 and 2004. Some found a clear benefit from zinc lozenges, but others found nothing. Some showed dramatic reductions in cold duration, while at least one suggested that zinc lozenges might actually make colds worse. The scientific literature was a jumble, and the experts could not agree on what it meant. The inconsistency was maddening. Zinc lozenges became one of the most hotly debated topics in the world of everyday health remedies, with passionate advocates on both sides. The media swung back and forth between hopeful reports of a cold cure and dismissive stories calling the whole thing worthless, sometimes in the same week. Consumers, caught in the crossfire, bought zinc lozenges in enormous quantities during cold season, winced at the metallic taste, and wondered whether they were wasting their money. The resolution came from an unexpected direction: chemistry. In 1997, Eby himself published a paper explaining that the crucial factor was not how much zinc the lozenge contained, but how much of that zinc was actually released as free zinc particles into the mouth and throat. Different zinc compounds behave differently in the chemistry of the mouth. Some release their zinc freely, but when zinc is combined with certain common lozenge ingredients, including citric acid and several flavoring agents, the zinc gets locked up in stable chemical bonds that prevent it from reaching the virus. The zinc was physically present in the lozenge, but it was chemically unavailable. This insight explained the contradictory results with elegant simplicity. The studies that showed a benefit had used lozenge recipes that released plenty of free zinc. The studies that showed no benefit had used recipes in which the zinc was chemically tied up and unable to do anything. Some formulations that released zinc in a different chemical form actually appeared to make things worse. The recipe of the lozenge mattered more than the amount of zinc inside it, a subtlety that had been entirely missed by the researchers who designed the trials and the companies that made the products. Later reviews of the evidence have supported this explanation. When researchers looked only at trials using properly formulated lozenges, they found that zinc treatment shortened colds by roughly a third compared to dummy lozenges. Lozenges using one particular zinc compound showed about a 40% reduction in cold length, while those using another showed about a 28% reduction. How zinc actually works against cold viruses is still not entirely settled, though the leading ideas are well supported. The main theory is that free zinc particles directly block the cold virus from attaching to the cells lining the nose and throat, preventing it from getting inside and making copies of itself. Zinc may also strengthen the local immune defenses in the throat and make cell surfaces more resistant to viral entry. Today, zinc lozenges remain widely available, though the quality and formulation of commercial products varies enormously. The best current evidence suggests that zinc lozenges of the right type, taken within the first day of cold symptoms and dissolved slowly in the mouth every few hours, can shorten a cold by roughly 1 to 3 days. It is not a cure, but for an illness that affects billions of people every year and for which no other effective treatment exists, even a day or two of relief is no small thing. The zinc lozenge story offers a gentle reminder that in medicine, as in metallurgy, the details of how something is prepared can matter as much as the raw material itself. In September of 1883, a man named Charles Raspe was riding along the fences of a sheep station in the dry western plains of New South Wales, when he noticed something peculiar about a low, rocky ridge the locals called Broken Hill. The rock was stained with dark metallic colors that reminded him of tin ore, and his curiosity, sharpened by the tin prospecting fever sweeping Australia at the time, led him to break off samples and send them for analysis. The results were better than tin. The ridge contained massive deposits of lead and zinc ore, along with significant quantities of silver. Raspe, a German immigrant who had been working as a humble boundary rider on a sheep station in the middle of nowhere, had stumbled upon one of the richest metal deposits on Earth. Within weeks, Raspe pegged a claim with 2 associates. Together with 4 other partners, they formed a group of 7 and began developing the deposit. In 1885, they incorporated as the Broken Hill Proprietary Company, better known by its initials. The company that began as a zinc and lead mining operation on a dusty outback hillside would grow into one of the largest mining companies in the world, eventually branching into iron, steel, and petroleum. Today, it is a corporate giant worth more than $100 billion, and it all began with one man's curiosity about a strangely colored rock. The Broken Hill deposit was extraordinary in its scale. The ore body, known as the Line of Lode, stretched for roughly 7 kilometers along the surface and extended hundreds of meters underground. A massive concentration of silver, lead, and zinc minerals embedded in very ancient rock. Mining operations attracted thousands of workers from across Australia and around the world, transforming Broken Hill from a sheep station into a bustling town with all the energy and rough edges of a classic boomtown. In the early years, the focus was on silver and lead, which were easier to extract and more immediately profitable. The zinc in the ore was actually considered a nuisance at first, complicating the processing of lead and silver and reducing the quality of the output. It was not until the development of a clever water-based separation technique in the early 1900s that the zinc could be efficiently recovered as a valuable product in its own right. This technique used chemicals that attached selectively to one mineral while leaving the other behind, allowing lead and zinc to be separated in a way that the old fire-based methods could not achieve. It was one of the great innovations in mining history, and its development at Broken Hill turned zinc from a troublesome impurity into a profitable commodity. The social history of Broken Hill is as remarkable as its geology. The town developed a fiercely independent and militant labor culture that made it one of the most important centers of workers' rights in Australian history. A major strike in 1892, triggered when the mining companies tried to cut wages during an economic downturn, lasted 16 weeks and ended in defeat for the miners, with several leaders arrested and imprisoned. But the defeat strengthened rather than broke the labor movement, contributing to the growth of the Australian Labor Party, which drew much of its early support from mining communities like Broken Hill. Mining at the original company's operations ceased in 1939, when the company shifted its focus to steel and other ventures. But other companies continued to extract zinc and lead from the line of lode well into the 20th century, and the mines produced metal continuously for more than 100 years. 700 miles to the northwest, in the remote outback of Queensland, another great zinc deposit was found in 1923. A prospector named John Campbell Miles, working in the harsh scrubland between two small towns, found outcrops of lead and zinc ore that looked remarkably like the deposits at Broken Hill. A mining engineer who examined the find immediately recognized the resemblance and secured an option over the claims, gambling that a second Broken Hill might lie beneath the red Queensland earth. A company was formed in 1924, but developing the deposit was slow and punishing. The location was hundreds of miles from the nearest railway or major town. Summer temperatures regularly exceeded 40 degrees. The ore was metallurgically complex in ways that no one had dealt with before. A railway had to be built, a town constructed from nothing, and processing facilities designed from scratch. Production did not begin until 1931, and the early years were so financially difficult that the company nearly went bankrupt several times during the Great Depression. The turning point came in the late 1930s and 40s, when wartime demand for zinc and lead provided the economic push that peacetime markets had failed to deliver. The company invested heavily in new facilities, and by mid-century the operation had become one of the largest and most productive zinc-lead mines in the world. The town that grew around the mine became a remote but prosperous outback community of more than 20,000 people, dependent almost entirely on mining. The enormous smokestack of the smelter, visible for miles across the flat landscape, became an iconic symbol of the Australian mining industry. Together, these two great deposits established Australia as one of the world's leading zinc producers, a position the country holds to this day. Australia possesses the world's largest known zinc reserves, estimated at roughly 68 million tonnes, more than any other country. The Australian zinc industry, born from one man's chance discovery on a sheep station and another man's prospecting in the outback, has been producing zinc continuously for well over a century, feeding the global appetite for galvanized steel, brass, batteries, and the countless other products that depend on this versatile and ever-present metal. 170 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle, in the treeless frozen landscape of Alaska's Brooks Range, sits one of the most improbable industrial operations on Earth. The Red Dog Mine, in the far northwest corner of Alaska, is the world's largest zinc mine and home to the world's largest known zinc reserves. It accounts for roughly 1/10 of all the zinc produced on the planet, and it operates in conditions that would seem to make any kind of mining impossible. Temperatures that plunge to 40 below in winter, permanently frozen ground extending hundreds of feet beneath the surface, months of continuous Arctic darkness, and a location so remote that it can only be reached by air for most of the year. The ore is trucked 82 miles along a private road to a port on the Arctic coast, where it is loaded onto ships during a brief summer shipping window of only about 100 days. Red Dog began operating in December of 1989, the product of a partnership between a major mining company and an Alaska Native corporation representing the local people. The deposit itself was first spotted in 1968, when a pilot noticed distinctive orange-red staining on the creek beds below and reported it as a potential mineral occurrence. By the mid-1970s, the enormous extent of the deposit was becoming clear. The partnership between the mining company and the native corporation is structured so that the local community receives a growing share of the profits and employment opportunities. It is often cited as one of the more successful examples of cooperation between a mining company and an indigenous community, though it is not without criticism, particularly around environmental concerns and the cultural impact of large-scale industry on a community that has traditionally lived by hunting and fishing. The mine faces an emerging challenge that its original designers could not have anticipated. The permanently frozen ground that underlies the site and the road to the port is thawing at an accelerating rate because of rising temperatures. This thawing threatens the stability of waste storage areas, transportation routes, and building foundations. Developing permanent solutions could take a decade and cost hundreds of millions of dollars, adding a new and unpredictable challenge to the already difficult economics of Arctic mining. At the opposite end of the Earth, in the thin air of the Peruvian Andes at an elevation of more than 14,000 feet, stands the city of Cerro de Pasco, one of the highest cities in the world and one of the most tragic examples of what happens when mining consumes the community that depends on it. Silver was discovered there in 1630, and for centuries the city prospered as one of the richest mining areas in South America. By the early 1900s, it was a substantial and proud city. The shift to open-pit mining in the 1950s changed everything. When the mining company discovered that the richest remaining deposits lay directly beneath the town, it began digging an enormous pit within the city limits. Over the decades, that pit has expanded relentlessly, swallowing homes, streets, churches, and entire neighborhoods. Today, it stretches across hundreds of acres, a terraced void descending deep into the earth, separated from remaining houses by, in some places, only a few meters of crumbling ground. The environmental damage is comprehensive. Scientists have found dangerously elevated levels of heavy metals in the soil, water, and air. A study found that children in the city had average test scores far below the national average and alarmingly high levels of lead in their blood. Efforts to relocate the population have been slow, and the mining continues. Between these two extremes, zinc mining operations are scattered across the globe, following the geological formations where zinc minerals are concentrated. China dominates world production, producing roughly 4 million tons per year, about 1/3 of the global total. Chinese zinc mines are concentrated in the southern and western provinces, many of them in the same regions where Ming Dynasty metalworkers first smelted zinc 5 centuries ago. The continuity is striking. Peru is the second largest producer, with major operations scattered across the Andes. One of the world's largest copper-zinc mines, in the Ancash region, produced roughly 370,000 tons of zinc in a recent year. India, the country where zinc was first produced as a pure metal more than 1,000 years ago, remains a significant producer through a modern company operating in Rajasthan, including operations near the ancient Zawar site. The continuity between the ancient Indian zinc industry and its modern descendant is remarkable. The same hills, the same minerals, the same basic logic of pulling zinc from the earth and sending it to market. Mexico, with its long history of mining stretching back to the colonial era, is another important producer. Canadian production centered in British Columbia and the Northern Territories has declined from its mid-20th century peak, but remains meaningful. And new zinc mining frontiers are being explored in Africa, where the continent's vast geological potential is only beginning to be tapped. The geography of zinc mining in the 21st century reflects a broader shift from the developed to the developing world. The old zinc mines of Belgium, Germany, and the American Tri-State District are long closed, their deposits exhausted and their environmental legacies still being cleaned up at enormous expense. The future of zinc mining lies in the Arctic, the Andes, the Australian outback, and the geological frontiers of Africa and Central Asia, places where the ore is rich, but the challenges, environmental, social, and technical, are enormous. Whether the zinc industry can extract the metal the world needs without repeating the environmental and human disasters of the past is one of the defining questions of this metal's future. And that question leads us naturally to consider the environmental shadow that zinc mining has already cast, a shadow that stretches across continents and centuries. In the autumn of 1898, workers fired up a new zinc smelter on the banks of a river in eastern Pennsylvania, in a town so newly founded that it did not yet have a proper name. They would call it Palmerton, after the president of the zinc company that built it. And for the next 8 decades, the smelter would pour wealth into the community and poison into the sky. The process of roasting zinc ore released not just zinc but sulfur fumes, lead, and a cocktail of other heavy metals that drifted upward and settled on the flanks of the mountain that rose steeply above the town on both sides of the narrow valley. Year after year, decade after decade, the emissions accumulated. The forests on the mountainside, once thick with oak, hickory, and hemlock, began to thin, then to wither, then to vanish entirely. By the middle of the 20th century, more than 2,000 acres of mountainside had been stripped bare of all life, the soil rendered so toxic that nothing could grow. Photographs from that era show a landscape that looks like the surface of the moon, a barren expanse of grey earth, an exposed rock rising above a town where people lived, worked, and raised their children. The smelter ran from 1898 until December of 1980. When declining zinc markets and growing environmental pressure finally shut it down. Over those 82 years, the smelter had released an estimated 260,000 tons of zinc, nearly 7,000 tons of lead, and more than 3,000 tons of another toxic metal into the air. 33 million tons of rocky waste sat in a formation stretching more than 2 miles, standing more than 100 feet high, a mountain of industrial refuse that dwarfed the town it loomed over. Heavy metals leached from the waste into the local waterways, contaminating the water that communities downstream depended on. In 1983, the government declared the site one of the most contaminated locations in the United States. Testing revealed dangerously elevated levels of lead in the blood of local children, and livestock and fish in the surrounding area were found to contain dangerous concentrations of heavy metals. The cleanup, which began in 1987, has involved regrading and replanting the mountainside, cleaning residential areas, and treating contaminated water, and it continues to this day, 4 decades after it started. Airplanes periodically scatter grass and wildflower seeds across the mountainside, trying to coax life back onto soil that was poisoned more than a century ago. The mountain is slowly growing green again, but the process is measured in decades. Palmerton was not unique. Zinc smelting, by its very nature, is one of the dirtiest of all metalworking processes. The metal's low boiling point, the same property that made it so difficult for ancient smelters to capture, means that zinc vaporizes easily and escapes as fumes unless carefully contained. Those fumes carry not only zinc but also the sulfur, lead, and other toxic metals commonly found alongside zinc in its ores. Before modern pollution controls, zinc smelters were notorious for poisoning their surroundings. In Zambia, a former lead zinc mine in the central part of the country created one of the most severe cases of lead contamination in the world. The mine operated for decades during the colonial era before closing in the 1990s, but it was never cleaned up. Millions of tons of lead-bearing waste remain piled around the old mine site. The soil contamination is staggering, reaching levels hundreds of times above what is considered safe. Researchers estimate that the vast majority of children living near the old mine have elevated levels of lead in their blood, and roughly half of them urgently need medical treatment. Reports have documented that businesses were still conducting hazardous processing of the old mine waste as recently as the early 2020s, despite the well-known health crisis. In Oklahoma, the Tri-State Mining District left behind a legacy we have already visited, a landscape of enormous waste piles, contaminated water, and a town that was eventually dissolved because the ground beneath it was too unstable and the soil too poisonous for people to live there safely. In Peru, the mining city high in the Andes watches as the open pit expands closer and closer to the remaining houses, while children grow up with lead in their blood and diminished prospects because of it. In Belgium, the legacy of the 19th century zinc boom around Liège includes contaminated farmland. In Australia, a zinc smelter has been the subject of decades of concern over lead contamination in the surrounding community. The paradox of zinc is that it is simultaneously essential and dangerous. In tiny amounts, zinc is vital to every living thing, a necessary part of hundreds of bodily processes, critical for immune function, growth, and development. But in the concentrations produced by mining and smelting, it becomes a poison that kills plants, fouls water, and sickens whole communities. The line between essential nutrient and environmental contaminant is remarkably thin, and the history of zinc mining is in many ways the story of that line being crossed again and again. Modern zinc operations have dramatically reduced their environmental impact compared to the smelters of earlier centuries. The electrical refining process produces zinc through a water-based method that generates far fewer air emissions. Technology now captures the sulfur fumes that were once released as pollution and converts them into a useful industrial chemical. Water treatment systems prevent heavy metals from entering rivers and streams. But the legacy of past practices cannot be so easily erased. The cleanup of contaminated sites will require attention and money for decades or centuries to come. The children who grew up near mines and smelters will carry the effects of lead exposure for the rest of their lives. The enormous waste piles of the old mining districts are being removed, truck by truck, a process measured in decades and hundreds of millions of dollars. The environmental shadow of zinc is long, and it falls most heavily on the communities that were closest to the mines and smelters, the workers and their families, the people on whose land the minerals were found, the children who played on the waste piles because no one told them they were dangerous. In the small town of Carver, Massachusetts, on a quiet triangle of grass where two roads meet, a soldier stands at eternal attention. He wears the uniform of the Union Army, his musket resting at his side, his face cast in an expression of solemn resolve. The monument was put up after the Civil War to honor the town's fallen, and at first glance it looks like bronze, the traditional material of public sculpture. But if you tap it, the sound is wrong, lighter and more bell-like than the deep thud of bronze. And if you look closely at the seams, you can see where sections were fitted together and joined with molten metal. This soldier is not bronze at all. He is zinc, one of hundreds of mass-produced zinc monuments sold to small American towns in the decades after the Civil War by a company in Connecticut that marketed its product under a name chosen to inspire confidence and disguise the truth: white bronze. The company was founded in 1879, though its origins reach back a few years earlier, when two men in upstate New York developed a cemetery marker made from cast zinc. They sold the manufacturing rights, and within 5 years the enterprise had incorporated under the grander name of the Monumental Bronze Company. The sales pitch was simple and effective. White bronze monuments were cheaper than real bronze or carved stone, yet they were durable, weather-resistant, and could be ordered in a wide variety of designs. A small town that could never afford to commission a bronze sculptor could order a complete Civil War memorial from a catalogue, choose from a selection of soldier poses, inscriptions, and decorative elements, and receive a ready-made tribute shipped by rail. The material, despite the marketing name, contained no bronze at all. It was nearly pure zinc with a small addition of tin, and it was neither white nor bronze, but a distinctive bluish grey. The monuments were cast in sections using sand molds, assembled by joining the sections with molten zinc, sandblasted to a uniform finish, and coated. The result looked at a respectful distance, remarkably like genuine bronze. Between 1879 and 1914, the company produced Civil War memorials, cemetery headstones, portrait medallions, busts, fountains, and decorative art that can be found today in 30 states across the country. In 1914, the government took over the company's facilities to produce military equipment for the approaching war in Europe, and it never made another monument. But its zinc soldiers endure. Unlike real bronze, which develops a green surface over time, these monuments retain their bluish-gray color or develop a distinctive white coating, making them recognizable to anyone who knows what to look for. Zinc's role in the visual arts extends well beyond sculpture. In printmaking, zinc plates became an important medium for a type of printing in the 1800s, offering an affordable and portable alternative to the heavy limestone slabs traditionally used. The process was developed in France and became popular among artists who wanted to make prints without the expense and physical difficulty of working with stone. Some notable French artists used zinc plates to create prints during the late 1800s. The portability and ease of working with zinc made it ideal for artists working outside the major studios. In painting, zinc made its most consequential contribution through zinc white, the pigment based on zinc oxide that was developed in the 1780s as a non-toxic replacement for poisonous lead white. We have already heard this part of the story, how the Impressionists largely avoided it, how later artists embraced it, and how the paint it produced is now slowly cracking and deteriorating in museums around the world. It is one of the more poignant ironies in the history of art materials. A pigment adopted to protect painters from poison is now slowly damaging the paintings it was used to create. Beyond the studio and the monument, zinc has woven itself into culture in subtler ways. The familiar metallic clang of a galvanized steel bucket, the silvery gleam of a new zinc roof catching the morning light, the rattle of zinc die-cast toys in a child's toy box. These are the sounds and textures of a metal that shapes the daily experience of millions of people who have never given zinc a thought. In Paris, the zinc rooftops have become an iconic element of the city's identity, celebrated in paintings, photographs, films, and travel writing. The rooftop zinc is both functional and beautiful, and the craftsmen who install it are recognized as artists in their own right. Zinc has also played a role in some of the darker corners of culture. The practice of lining coffins with zinc for preservation during transport was common in the 1800s and 1900s, and the zinc-lined coffin appears in literature from Victorian England to the present as a marker of wealth, status, or distant death. In Russian and Soviet culture, the zinc coffin took on a particularly powerful meaning after the Soviet war in Afghanistan, when the bodies of soldiers killed in that conflict were shipped home in sealed zinc caskets. A phrase meaning zinc boy entered the language as a way of referring to a soldier killed in war, and the zinc coffin became a symbol of the secrecy and denial that surrounded the conflict. A Belarusian journalist and Nobel Prize winner titled her devastating oral history of the war after these zinc coffins, using the sealed metal as a metaphor for the hidden truth of a war the government tried to keep silent. In the world of collectibles and antiques, zinc carries a particular kind of dread. The vintage die-cast toys of the mid-20th century, the model cars and trains and miniature figures, are highly valued by collectors. But they carry a unique risk, the slow destructive corrosion known as zinc pest, caused by tiny amounts of lead contamination in the alloy. Affected objects gradually swell, crack, and crumble into fragments, a process that is irreversible once it begins. Collectors speak of opening a display case to find a treasured vintage toy warped and splitting, destroyed from within by impurities introduced at the factory decades earlier. The heartbreak of watching a prized object slowly disintegrate is a reminder of how much invisible chemistry shapes the physical world. Zinc in art and culture is, in the end, a reflection of zinc in life itself, a metal that works quietly behind the scenes, doing useful but unglamorous things, rarely noticed, often mistaken for something else. The zinc soldiers standing on town greens across America were designed to look like bronze. The zinc roofs of Paris were chosen for their practicality rather than their prestige. The zinc in a child's toy car was never meant to be noticed at all. But taken together, These appearances weave zinc into the fabric of human experience in ways that are deeper and more personal than any industrial statistic can convey. On any given weekday morning, in a trading room overlooking the Thames in the City of London, traders at the London Metal Exchange begin their daily work of buying and selling zinc. The exchange's zinc contract is the primary benchmark for zinc pricing around the world, and its movements ripple outward through a supply chain that stretches from mines in the Andes and the Arctic to smelters in China and refineries in South Korea, to galvanizing plants in Germany and casting operations in Japan. The price of zinc shifts daily, reflecting the constant tension between how much the world can produce and how much it needs. The modern zinc industry is dominated by a single country to a degree that few other metals can match. China produces roughly 4 million tons per year, about a third of the world total and more than the next 4 largest producers combined. Chinese zinc mines are concentrated in the same southern and western provinces where Ming Dynasty metal workers first smelted zinc 5 centuries ago. China's appetite for zinc is equally enormous. The country's consumption has roughly quadrupled in the first 2 decades of this century, driven by the biggest construction boom in human history. Every new apartment tower, every highway guardrail, every power line and industrial building requires galvanized steel, and the zinc industry has grown in step with China's transformation. Galvanizing accounts for more than 60% of China's zinc consumption, reflecting the country's position as the world's largest steel producer. The zinc that coats that steel is rarely visible to anyone looking at the finished building or bridge, but it is there, quietly preventing rust and extending the life of every piece of steel it touches. Beyond China, the picture is more varied. Peru, with its major mines scattered across the Andes, is the second largest producer. Australia, sitting on the world's largest known zinc reserves, produces zinc from operations in remote corners of the continent. India continues to mine zinc from the same ancient hills of Rajasthan where the story of metallic zinc began. And a handful of multinational mining companies headquartered in Switzerland, Canada, Sweden, and India control an ever larger share of global production through mergers and acquisitions that have reshaped the industry over the past few decades. Globally, roughly 13 million tons of zinc are mined each year, making it the 4th most commonly extracted metal after iron, aluminum, and copper. In recent years, the world has been consuming slightly more zinc than it produces, creating a persistent tightness in the market that reflects a fundamental challenge of zinc supply. Unlike copper or iron, which can be stored and recycled relatively easily, zinc is often consumed in ways that make recovery difficult. The zinc coating on galvanized steel is measured in tiny fractions of a millimeter, and when that steel is eventually scrapped and melted, the zinc turns to vapor and must be captured from the exhaust gases, a process that recovers some but not all of the metal. Recycling zinc is both a promising trend and an ongoing challenge. About 30% of global zinc production now comes from recycled sources, and the rate has been rising as the systems for collecting and processing zinc-bearing scrap improve. The technology for recovering zinc from scrap is quite effective, with more than 80% of the zinc in scrap that actually reaches a recycling facility being successfully recovered. The problem is not the technology, but the collection. Much zinc-bearing material never reaches a recycling facility because it gets mixed with other waste, sent to landfills, or simply lost. In developed countries, the recycling rate is reasonably good, but in China, where most of the world's zinc is consumed, recovery rates are still relatively low. The economics of zinc are shaped by an unusual feature of its geology. Zinc is almost always found alongside other metals, particularly lead, copper, and silver. This means that decisions about whether to open, expand, or close a zinc mine are often influenced by the prices of these companion metals. Some of the world's largest zinc operations are primarily copper or lead mines that happen to produce large amounts of zinc as a side product, while others are dedicated zinc mines where lead is the secondary output. This intertwining of different metal markets adds a layer of complexity to zinc economics that pure-play metal industries do not face. The geography of zinc smelting has shifted dramatically in this century. The old smelters of Belgium, Germany, and the American Midwest have largely closed, replaced by newer, larger operations in China, South Korea, India, and other parts of Asia. China alone operates more smelting capacity than the rest of the world combined, processing not only its own ore, but also material imported from mines in Australia, Peru, and elsewhere. This concentration of processing in a single country has become a growing concern for industrial planners in Europe and North America, who worry about the vulnerability of supply chains that depend so heavily on one source. The zinc industry's relationship with the environment has improved vastly since the dark days of open-air smelting. Modern plants capture sulfur emissions and convert them into useful industrial chemicals. The electrical refining process has largely replaced the old fire-based methods that produced the worst air pollution. Water treatment prevents heavy metals from entering rivers and streams. But mining still generates large volumes of waste rock, and managing this material over the long term remains a challenge, particularly in regions where a changing climate is altering the behavior of water and frozen ground. Looking at the numbers, zinc remains a metal of quiet, enormous importance. It is the fourth most used metal in the world. It protects more than half of all steel from rust. It is inside every alkaline battery, every brass fitting, every galvanized nail and bolt. It is essential to the health of every person on the planet. And yet it remains largely invisible to the public, a metal that does its work without recognition, the most important metal that most people have never thought about. But the story of zinc is not finished, and its next chapter may be its most important one yet. In a laboratory in Stockholm, Sweden, a team of engineers is testing a battery that contains no lithium, no cobalt, no nickel, and no rare earth elements. The battery is built around zinc, the most ordinary and least exotic of metals, paired with another common mineral. The liquid inside is water-based, which means the battery cannot catch fire, a quality that sets it sharply apart from the lithium batteries that power our phones and laptops but have also caused fires in warehouses, cargo ships, and homes. This zinc battery is not designed for small devices. It is designed for something far larger and potentially far more important, storing the energy produced by wind turbines and solar panels so that it can be released when the wind dies down and the sun sets. The promise of zinc-based energy storage may prove to be the most consequential chapter in the metal's long story. The great challenge of renewable energy, the gap between when power is generated and when it is needed, requires enormous amounts of energy storage to solve. Lithium batteries dominate the market for phones and electric cars, but they face serious challenges at the scale needed for power grids. Lithium is expensive, concentrated in a handful of countries, and tangled in geopolitical tensions. Some of the materials needed for lithium batteries are mined under conditions that have drawn widespread criticism. And lithium batteries lose capacity over time in ways that make them less economical for the decade-long lifespans required by grid-scale installations. Zinc batteries offer a different set of trade-offs. Global zinc reserves are vast, far larger than lithium reserves. Zinc is mined on every inhabited continent and available from a diverse group of countries, reducing the risk of supply disruptions. Zinc batteries can endure thousands of charging cycles operating for 10 to 15 years with proper care. And the raw materials are cheap, potentially allowing grid-scale zinc batteries to cost less than half of what equivalent lithium systems cost. The technology takes several forms. Some use zinc in a way similar to how lithium batteries work, with zinc carrying the electrical charge instead of lithium. Others use zinc combined with oxygen from the air itself, a chemistry that has already been in commercial use for decades in the tiny batteries that power hearing aids. Scaling this technology up to the size of a shipping container or a small building is an entirely different engineering challenge, but the theoretical potential is enormous. Several companies have already begun installing zinc-based batteries for large-scale power storage in countries around the world. The challenges are real and should not be understated. Rechargeable zinc batteries still suffer from technical problems that limit how many times they can be charged and used. The zinc can gradually dissolve and form needle-like crystals that damage the battery from the inside. The reactions involving air can be sluggish, limiting how quickly power can be delivered. But research is progressing rapidly, and the problems are being steadily whittled down. Beyond batteries, zinc's future is woven tightly into the global shift toward clean energy. The infrastructure of renewable power depends heavily on galvanized steel. A single large offshore wind turbine requires roughly 4 tons of zinc to protect the steel in its tower, foundation, and supports. A large solar installation needs hundreds of tons of zinc for the galvanized frames, supports, and fencing that hold the panels in place. As the world builds more renewable energy to meet climate goals, the demand for galvanized steel, and therefore for zinc, is projected to grow substantially. Industry estimates suggest that the clean energy transition could increase global zinc demand by 15 to 20% over the coming decades. The question of whether there is enough zinc in the ground to meet these growing needs is more complex than the raw numbers suggest. Current reserves at roughly 250 million tons represent about 2 decades of supply at current rates. But reserves are a moving target. As zinc prices rise and exploration technology improves, deposits that are not economically viable today become profitable tomorrow, and the reserve base expands. Throughout history, predictions of zinc running out have consistently been wrong, not because the math was bad, but because the predictions failed to account for new discoveries, better extraction methods, and the powerful incentive that rising prices create for finding more ore. Recycling will play a growing role. The vast quantities of galvanized steel, brass, and zinc-containing products installed over the past century are beginning to reach the end of their useful lives, creating a growing stream of zinc-bearing material that can be recovered and reused. Researchers have noted that the total amount of zinc already embedded in buildings, roads, vehicles, and consumer goods now exceeds the known zinc deposits still in the ground. This urban mine of zinc already in circulation may eventually become a more important source than digging new ore from the earth. Zinc is also finding new roles in medicine and public health. Coatings containing zinc are being developed for hospital surfaces and medical devices, taking advantage of zinc's natural ability to slow the growth of bacteria and fungi. In a world facing the growing threat of germs that resist antibiotics, zinc-based approaches offer a promising alternative. Tiny zinc particles are being studied for use in wound dressings, water purification, and agriculture, where they could reduce the need for chemical pesticides. In farming, the recognition that zinc-poor soils produce zinc-poor crops, which produce zinc-poor people, has driven a growing effort to address the problem at its source. Programs are developing crop varieties that naturally accumulate more zinc in their edible parts, a strategy that could improve the health of hundreds of millions of people without requiring any change in diet or access to supplements. And so we come to the end of our journey tonight, a journey that has taken us from the scorching furnaces of ancient Rajasthan to the frozen tundra of the Alaskan Arctic, from the golden coins of Rome to the zinc pennies in your pocket, from a tiny country created by a zinc mine to the glowing rocks of a New Jersey museum, from the silver rooftops of Paris to the batteries that may one day store the power of the sun and the wind. We have followed a metal that hid inside brass for 3,000 years before anyone knew it was there. We have watched it frustrate the finest minds in European science for centuries, while Indian craftsmen quietly mastered its production in clay pots shaped like eggplants. We have seen it protect steel from rust, power field radios in the trenches of 2 world wars, give Paris its iconic skyline, and reveal itself as essential to every cell in the human body. We have also seen the price that mining has sometimes extracted from the earth and from the communities closest to the mines, a shadow that hangs over even the most useful of metals. Zinc has always been the quiet one, the metal that does its work without asking for attention, the one that hides behind copper in brass, behind iron in galvanized steel, behind a thin copper coat on the penny in your hand. It has never been glamorous or celebrated the way gold and silver have been, but it is, in its own understated way, one of the most important elements in the story of human civilization. The workers at Zawar, those nameless craftsmen who first coaxed pure zinc from the earth 1,000 years ago using nothing but clay and charcoal, could not have imagined that their silvery metal would one day be asked to help power a warming planet. But they understood something about zinc that remains as true today as it was then. It is a humble metal, overlooked and underestimated, that quietly makes everything around it work better and last longer. And with that thought, let yourself rest. Close your eyes if you have not already, and let the story of zinc settle softly around you. It is a metal that has been keeping watch over the things that matter for a very long time, and it will be there, quiet and faithful when the morning comes. Good night, and sleep well.